free £10,000 in cash for you to spend this summer. Then we want to send you on a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. Thanks to Variety Cruises, you'll be able to choose from any of their 2025 Greek adventures and discover Greece like never before. And with flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, all you have to do is relax. We'll also give you these terrific travel treats. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. Today, as a new report claims homelessness among asylum seekers has soared by 239%. I'll be asking, why should British taxpayers pick up the tab? Now, if you think we've got migration chaos here, it's bedlam in Brussels, because last night Poland and Hungary sensationally rejected the European Union's new migration and asylum bill that fines member states astonishing €20,000 for every asylum seeker they refuse to take. Our man in the heart of Brussels will bring us up to speed. Could Slovakia be next? Meanwhile, there's more chaos for Rishi Sunak as Boris Johnson put the boot into the PM while in Canada on the topics of defence, smoking and the spirit of this man, Winston Churchill.
When I look at some of the things that we're doing now, I think that are being done in the name of conservatism, I think they're absolutely nuts.
Talking of absolutely nuts, could Harry and William finally bury the hatchet? And I don't mean between each other's shoulder blades, because it's rumoured that King Charles could end up being the peacemaker. And that's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Always an absolute pleasure to have your company. So a 239% increase in homelessness among asylum seekers. The big question is, why should we pick up the tab? So in these two instances, either they've been granted the right to remain, in which case they could always get a job, that's what the rest of us have to do, and pay their way, or if they haven't been granted the right to remain, why don't they just be deported? Those are the people that we're paying for an additional £600 million this year, £4.3 billion in total. I'm saying, is enough enough? Should we have a huge debate about this? Yes, we should, and it's coming on this show. And as usual, I'd like to hear from you, and there's a new way to get in touch with us. You can send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/your say. You'll see that I'm logged in, you reply to me, I get them here, I read out the best ones during the show. Keep them clean. But before all of that, it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour, the Prime Minister says the plan is working as new NHS figures show hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for a 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's down from 321,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March of next year. Rishi Sunak said there's more to be done.
Well, when I became Prime Minister, I said that cutting waiting lists was one of my 5 priorities. And whilst we haven't made as much progress as I would have liked, today's figures show that we are making headway towards that goal. Over the last 5 months, a reduction of around 200,000 in the overall waiting lists, which is positive. And if it wasn't for industrial action, an extra 430,000 patients would have been treated. So whilst there's, of course, a lot more work to do, the plan is working.
And nearly half of workers have spent time looking at jobs outside the NHS, according to new analysis. Researchers have found around 47% have looked at employment outside the NHS, with 14% applying for non-NHS jobs between March and June last year. It's understood stress, workload, staff shortages and pay are the top reasons for staff leaving the NHS. In other news, a man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was stabbed to death in the city as she walked her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habibur Massam stood in the glass-fronted dock as he was told by the judge he will appear again at Bradford Crown Court tomorrow. He spoke only to confirm his name, date of birth and address during the 6-minute-long hearing. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. A Moroccan asylum seeker on trial for the murder of a pensioner told police he was motivated by the conflict in Gaza. 45-year-old Ahmed Alid denies murdering 70-year-old Terence Carney in Hartlepool town centre, as well as the attempted murder of his housemate Javed Nouri. He says he carried out the attack as an act of revenge for what he says Israel killing children in Palestinian conflict. He is also accused of assaulting 2 female police officers who had interviewed him after his arrest. Hundreds of Tata steel workers are set to go on strike over the proposed closure of Port Talbot's blast furnaces. Around 1,500 steel workers based in Port Talbot and Llanwern in South Wales have voted for industrial action over the company's plan to close its furnaces, resulting in the potential loss of 2,800 jobs. It's the first time in over 40 years that Port Talbot steel workers have gone on strike. Institutional bias prevented further investigation of complaints made by sub-postmasters about the Post Office Horizon IT system. Former Post Office Managing Director David Smith has been giving evidence today to the inquiry into the Horizon IT scandal. Between 1999 and 2015, more than 900 sub-postmasters were prosecuted due to the faulty system. Mr Smith also apologised for a 2010 email saying a pregnant sub-postmistress' prison sentence was brilliant news. And the Royal Mail says it's working to remove counterfeit stamps from circulation after reports of fake ones. It follows calls from GB News for Royal Mail to investigate its systems after an investigation. The Telegraph reported China is flooding Britain with counterfeit Royal Mail stamps as small retailers are buying forgeries online. It's understood that the fakes were causing a rise in complaints that stamps bought from legitimate stores were being deemed fraudulent, which can result in a £5 penalty. Some members of the public gave their thoughts on the issue.
Awful, but this is what happens. There's a lot of counterfeit items right across the patch, really. So it doesn't surprise me, but I don't know whether there's anything that can be done at the borders.
Dreadful, really, dreadful situation. Just in addition to everything else that's going wrong in the world.
Well, I don't use stamps very often, to be perfectly honest. So it's, but I did see the difference between the real and the counterfeit, and you'd be hard pressed to see it, wouldn't you?
And a once-a-day migraine pill has been recommended on the NHS, with a charity claiming it could change the lives of thousands. The pill, sold under the brand name Equipta, has been given the green light for NHS use under new final draft guidance. Anyone who experiences at least 4 migraines a month and has tried at least 3 other methods but found no relief will be eligible. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
OK, we've got loads to get stuck into, so let's get cracking. And we start with yet more news on our broken asylum system and the number of homeless asylum seekers seeking urgent housing from English councils has increased by a shocking 239%, according to a new report. Now, charities have slammed what they call a dysfunctional system that is leaving people on streets in tents as council housing services struggle to cope with the influx of migrants and the government's sky-high asylum backlog. Well, to chew this over, I'm now joined in the studio by GB News' political correspondent Olivia Utley and immigration lawyer and friend of the show, Ivan Simpson. So let's start with you, Olivia. So this has become a political hot potato. These new figures on the surface are pretty eyebrow-raising. And then you understand the circumstances of why they are having their free hotels, let's be blunt, terminated. Who are the people that are being put out of hotels and, according to this report, made homeless?
Well, what's so fascinating about this report from Refuge, the homelessness charity, is that buried in the report itself, it says that actually 90% of these people who have been made homeless are people who have received a positive asylum decision. So these are people who have been legally granted the right to live and work in the UK. Now, I think quite a lot of people watching might feel as though if you have been given leave to live and work in the UK, then it is surely upon your head to find yourself some accommodation in which to live. Essentially, these people are in the same position as you or I. They have the right to live in the UK. What Refuge is arguing, and perhaps, it could be seen as a fair argument, is that they don't have very long in which to find somewhere to live. From when the decision is made, they have 28 days before they are kicked out of a hotel. And because the paperwork can all take quite a while, there are some stories of migrants who only get 7 days between getting the request and finding somewhere to live. But long term, of course, you cannot have asylum seekers who have been granted right to live in the UK, so legal migrants living semi-permanently in Home Office hotels. The cost of those Home Office hotels is absolutely phenomenal. Millions and millions every year from the British taxpayer. Politically, this is quite interesting because James Cleverly has said that by the end of May, he wants to see 150 of these hotels closed to migrants, and eventually the government has a plan to close down all of these hotels for migrant use. Well, that's not going to be particularly easy if Refuge is publishing reports showing that the number of migrants who've been made homeless over the last couple of years has increased by 239%. Puts the government in quite a sticky position.
Great stuff. Ivan, let's turn to you now. That's astonishing. So 90% of the people who this report are claiming are destitute could get a job. They could claim benefits. They could get on social housing lists. Why is this British taxpayers' problem?
Well, look, if I gave you 28 days to find another job, find another accommodation, I think you'll struggle. I think Olivia said some of them are given less than 7 days. So the problem is that they need a transitional period from when they are granted asylum and being supported under the National Asylum Support Scheme and to when they come off that, to help them to get jobs. Look, nobody wants... It's not a lifestyle choice to be homeless.
No, but it's a lifestyle choice to come across in a dinghy.
Indeed, but we're talking about people who've been granted asylum and have a legal right to remain in the UK. So if they haven't got a job, if they're not vulnerable and won't be automatically granted emergency accommodation by the council, they're going to end up living on the streets if they've got nobody else. And remember, these are the most vulnerable people coming to our shores.
Are they?
Well,
because I wonder, is there anything about the particular demographic of people who are most likely to be asylum seekers? Let's be honest, military-age men of a certain age, single men oftentimes, they won't get special treatment on social housing lists, will they?
No. Look, we always want to blame lawyers, the judges, the asylum seekers, anyone, but the thing is, the whole system is managed by the Home Office. And what it shows is not proper planning. The reason you're getting these spikes, because the Home Office are not planning for a transition for those granted asylum to get jobs. I mean, look, they could be offered some sort of work experience, apprentice scheme. There needs to be a minister responsible for getting those granted asylum into work. The other problem is those that are not granted asylum, 2/3 of those are not removed.
Yeah, they go into a perpetual loop of applying against it. But the point is this, right? If 10% of those people, if you said 90% are legally allowed to stay, 10% aren't allowed to stay, why aren't they just deported?
A lot of them don't have identity documents, or they come from countries where we don't have reciprocal arrangements to remove them there. So countries, for example, Syria is a good example. Even if you say you're Syrian and you're not accepted as Syrian and you are then refused, where do we send you to? We don't know where some of these people actually come from. There's no arrangements for them to be removed. So we have to do something about this problem.
Lydia.
What do you make of Labour's policy on this? Because what Labour has said is that it will employ an extra, I think it's 1,000 caseworkers in the Home Office to help with issues like this. Do you reckon that would solve the problem, or do you think it's more a problem of leadership? Because I've spoken to Conservatives who say the last thing we need is more pen pushers. What do you think?
It's a bit of both, but what they need is effective decision makers. Look, 50% of refusals are overturned by the courts. Well, that tells you that decisions are flawed. And that's my experience of dealing with Home Office presenting officers in court, or decisions which are, a lot of them are cut and paste. I mean, you see fundamental errors in getting the country wrong, or you can see what's going on. They're just cutting and pasting decisions and not really properly looking at each individual case. We need properly trained people to make these decisions. And I think you get better decisions and more people being approved or refused, but again, planning. The key is proper planning.
Your ideas of let's have a task force to get these people in work, let's have a task force to find them houses, but we don't do that for British people. I think people are starting to ask the question. 600 million extra last year, £4.3 billion on housing asylum seekers. We have a system which might not be perfect. If you are granted the right to remain, now, that's when you take responsibility for your own life, surely. You can't just rely ad infinitum on the British taxpayer to house you.
No, I agree, but the point is to get them working, paying taxes and getting into the system. Because if you look at the asylum seekers that have come in the last 20 years, they've been very successful, integrating, getting jobs, starting businesses. And so the answer must be to get them part of the economic system into the community, not to say, well, good luck. Here's the door, off you go, good luck, hope you find a job. Because they're ending up on the streets and that's not working.
But we have lots of job vacancies, so much so we're actually importing more people legally on visas. Why can't we integrate these people, for example, in picking crops or things like that?
Look, there's lots of jobs and I agree they should be working. But you're comparing asylum seekers with British people with a support system, with a network. They don't have that.
They've had free accommodation for a year. They've had free food. They've been taken care of by the taxpayer for a year.
We're signed up to that. So they're not getting anything they're not entitled to. If you don't like it, come out the asylum, come out the Refugee Convention. Vote for an MP that wants to do that. But don't complain when they're getting what we're obliged to give them.
OK, thank you very much. Superb conversation. Olivia Utley and immigration lawyer Ivan Simpson. Always a pleasure to have you both in the studio. Now, later this hour, I'll tell you why migration could be the issue that tears the European Union apart. And there's plenty of coverage of the migrant crisis on our website, gbnews.com. You've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country, so thank you very much. Now, brace yourselves, because it's time now for our biggest giveaway of the year so far. It's your chance to win £10,000 in cold, hard, tax-free cash, luxury travel items, and a 2025 Greek cruise, also worth 10 grand. It's a prize package worth £20,000, and it could be yours. And here's how you can get on board.
Variety Cruises have been sailing since 1942, and thanks to them, you could set sail in 2025. You have the chance to win a 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With your flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, you can choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. You'll also win an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash that you can use to make this summer spectacular. We'll also treat you to these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Great stuff. Now, just when Rishi Sunak had enough problems to deal with, he's back. Boris Johnson has said that one of his flagship policies is absolutely nuts. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Children's stories like Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland now come with a trigger warning at universities, alerting readers to possible themes of white supremacy.
Yes, these warnings are being applied to colonial narratives. That's the claim, commonly found in adventure stories and famous novels from the Victorian era. Well, joining us now is the actor Charlie Lawson. And Charlie, these warnings have been applied to Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. What's this university getting at?
Well, look, first of all, this is nothing new. We hadn't heard about it for a while. Universities have been doing this over the last couple of years. I remember having a chat with one of your colleagues. But when Gabriella, the lovely Gabby, phoned me up today, I had to beg her to put me on after 9 o'clock because I found myself getting rather irate about the whole thing. But I will do my best to be very polite.
Yes, keep it clean.
Yes, look, which is quite difficult for me, as you'll appreciate, over this subject. Look, this is universities just jumping on the same trying to be relevant bandwagon. Is it any wonder that we look at the quality of graduates from university, and in my humble opinion, some of them are slightly disappointing. But I did phone a couple of people I knew who had sons and daughters at various leading universities, and they had been speaking this morning. And thank the Lord, they think it's a complete load of bloody nonsense, as I do. Give the C.S. Lewis Centre a ring in East Belfast, because that's where your man came from. And I think you'll find you'll get short shrift, because we're not all about that in East Belfast. We don't censor anything.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Welcome back. It's 3:21. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Thanks for joining me. Now, later in the show, I'll be joined by the man who set up a website just for clever people called Trevor. He's one clever Trevor, and I'll have him on the show. Now, Boris Johnson has reignited his feud with Rishi Sunak by calling one of his flagship policies absolutely nuts. The Prime Minister wants to increase the minimum age for buying tobacco every year in an effort to phase out smoking. But it's fair to say Boris isn't impressed.
Look at some of the things that we're doing now, I think, or that are being done in the name of conservatism. I think they're absolutely nuts. And banning cigars. And what is? I mean, maybe you all think that's a great idea. I just can't see what is the point of banning? Well, the party of Winston Churchill wants to ban. I mean, donnez-moi un break, as they say in Quebec. You know, it's just mad.
Well, there's Bozza on fine form, and Boris didn't just criticise that government policy. He also said the UK needs to spend more on defence.
It's the moment for an even more robust posture. And I think that goes for my country as well. I think we all need to recognise that the world is more uncertain, more dangerous. We all need, frankly, to be spending more on defence. And that goes for the UK as well as everybody else.
Mm-hmm. There we go, Boris on the world stage, causing trouble as ever. And to pick the bones out of all of that, I'm joined in our studio by our political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, Boris, he's back. He's landing the blows, he's causing chaos. Let's start with the comment on smoking. A lot of people may agree with him.
Yeah. Nothing he ever says, hi Martin, good to see you in the studio. Nothing he ever says is by accident. Next Tuesday, MPs vote on the tobacco and vapes bill. And lots on the Tory right are looking to rebel on that. It's an idea which was put forward by the PM, Rishi Sunak, at his Conservative Party conference last year. They wonder why on earth are we banning things, and that was an idea which in the Boris Johnson way he was saying. So there will be a big rebellion on Tuesday about the ban on smoking. And of course, don't forget, it's a complicated ban that if you're 15, you can't buy them, you know, as it goes, and the age increases as you go through life. So why is this government banning things? And at the time, it was briefed that it was Rishi Sunak's version of gay marriage. It was a point of conscience. Maybe it's legacy planning, because certainly no Tory MPs were telling me we should ban smoking effectively before that conference.
So Boris effectively seems to be managing the revolt from outside. It's typical Boris, and that smoking, well, you're right, it's so confusing. You need a fag just to concentrate, to think about it. Let's talk about defence. Now, again, a lot of people on the right of the party have been saying we need to rev up defence spending. We're falling behind. Boris leading the charge again on that one.
I mean, few would disagree that on the right of the Tory party that the budget must increase. So he's basically saying these things in Canada in the early hours of the morning, just not being helpful at all to his successor, Rishi Sunak. The hope for the party is that they can get Boris Johnson back on side, and he campaigns with Rishi Sunak to try and hang on to as many seats as they can, one in 2019. Whether that happens, we'll wait and see.
Now, Wes Streeting, you've been speaking to him. He's been in the news. He's talking about reforming the NHS. Something, wow, you know, the Conservatives normally would do. He's also been in a bit of hot water, doing a U-turn on his trans comments. What do you got to tell us?
Yeah, Wes Streeting is interesting. He's one of the most interesting, I think, Labour MPs. For many, he was the candidate for the Labour Party who was meant to be the next Prime Minister, but the Tory Party imploded so quickly that Keir Starmer's been left in that pole position. But Wes Streeting is interesting. I asked him for GB News, would you allow the private sector to clear this waiting list, 7.5 million people waiting for operations, down a bit? So the PM says down for the past 5 months, but still quite a lot of people in pain, in discomfort, waiting for a service they're paying for their taxes. And he says, yeah, why not? So he's making very clear that Labour would put themselves at the centre of the need of the patient. I think that's where the politics are quite clever. Here's what he had to say.
I think people can see that I'm prepared to put people's noses out of joint to do the right thing when it comes to patients, getting people seen faster. I've been accused, Chris, as people have seen in recent days and weeks and months, actually, of wanting to privatise the NHS, that over my dead body would we privatise the NHS. I think one of the best things about it is that it's a public service and that when you fall ill, you don't have to worry about the bill. But we've got in the private sector spare capacity, those who can afford it are paying to go private. They are being seen faster. Working class people who can't afford it are being left behind. And so what I'd say to my critics is, you look those people in the eye and you tell them that you're prepared to see them wait longer because of your left-wing principles. I don't think that's right. I'm prepared to take on those arguments and do the right thing by patients, because I came into politics to help people from working class backgrounds like mine, to make sure everyone in this country gets a fair crack, and that's what a Labour government will do.
You know what strikes me about that, Chris? I've heard Nigel Farage say exactly the same thing. Go partially private, relieve the burden, incentivise it to those who can afford it, relieving the pressure on the working classes. That's a common sense policy.
We have a two-tier health service. Those who can afford to pay go private, and he's recognising that. He's saying, I will do the best by the patient, and that's why I think makes him so dangerous. And I think the Labour Party has the permission to reform the NHS in a way the Tory Party doesn't. The Tory Party is in a constant defensive crouch on health policy because it's not trusted with the NHS, despite increasing spending so much over recent years.
Well, if he makes good on that, that will be an early headline in itself. Now then, Graham Brady is releasing a book.
The most important man that you've never heard of, and why should you, or outside of the Westminster bubble, certainly. He's the chairman of the 1922 committee of MPs, Tory MPs, for all of the past 14 years of the Tories being in power. He's got a book out called Kingmaker, Secrets, Lies and the Truth About 5 Prime Ministers, because when they've been deposed, he's been at the heart of collecting letters of no confidence, going over a threshold, announcing there'll be a vote, and so it goes on. Interestingly for me, though, the book, which we knew was coming, we now have the title of it, is out on November the 7th. Now, I think the election's going to be November the 21st to avoid, so any money raised in the party conference, the Tory party, doesn't count in election spending. If that happens, this book will be dynamite at the heart of what I expect to be the general election campaign.
Now, you know Sir Graham Brady. You've interviewed him a bunch of times. Do you think he'll put the knife in? Will this be salacious?
Well, no knives.
Will there be lots of smoke, or will it be very Queensberry rules?
No knives. You're talking about Brutus and Caesar when you've mentioned knives. No knives, but I think what he will do is interestingly say, when this was happening, I had 25 letters in, 30, 40 letters in. So one idea he has looked at in the past is telling us what was going on behind the scenes. We all write, how many letters have gone in of no confidence in the leaders. Only he knows. Well, perhaps he might tell for the first time what he knew, and that'll be fascinating.
And the thing about having overseen so many prime ministers, because of course it's been rather chaotic, he will have the inside line on all of those end games, those dramatic sort of final days of prime ministership, and those in many ways are the most fascinating periods.
Yeah, and when he used to walk off number 10 and go through the back door, the front door. What's interesting about him is he turned down front bench roles to be this role, to be this chairman of the 1922 committee, because that is as important in his world as being a minister. I think he's proved it over the past 14 years.
You don't think there could be room for another 1922 committee, all those numbers of letters going through and seeing Rishi Sunak?
Well, the rumours
before there could be 6 prime ministers overseen.
There could be. This is the Tory party we're talking about. Rumours of 40 gone in. I'm not sure when they're going to get there. We'll know more probably after the local elections, Martin. Watch this space.
Superb, Chris Hope. Excellent as ever. Thanks for joining me in the studio. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. And our fresh developments on the story we first broke back in January about the fake Royal Mail stamp scandal. Apparently, it's all the fault of the Chinese. Or is it just a red herring? But first, it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Martin. It's 3:30. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. The Prime Minister says the plan is working as new NHS figures show hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for the 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's down from 321,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March of next year. Rishi Sunak said there's more to be done, though. A man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was stabbed to death in the city as she walked her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habibur Massam stood in the glass-fronted dock as he was told by the judge he will appear again at Bradford Crown Court tomorrow. He spoke only to confirm his name, date of birth and address during the 6-minute-long hearing. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. A change to family visa rules comes into force today as part of the government's plan to reduce immigration. It's part of the Home Secretary's promise to transform the UK's immigration system, cut unfair levels of migration and ensure those arriving here are not a burden to the taxpayer. The measure will see the minimum income for family visas rise by more than £10,000 to £29,000, an increase of more than 55%. And a new poll suggests Rishi Sunak and other high-profile Tories could keep their seats because of voter ID confusion in the next general election. A poll by campaign group Best for Britain found 16% of people did not know that they would need photo ID to vote in the upcoming local and general elections. The government passed the legislation in 2022, with the new rules coming into force last year. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2545 and €1.1692. The price of gold is £1,867.98 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,911 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, in a few minutes, I'll talk about the huge rift that's opened up in the European Union over its controversial new migration pact that landed last night. Hungary and Poland have already revolted. Will others follow? But first, there's a new way to get in touch with us here at GB News. And here's Bev Turner with all the details.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to the West Midlands firstly. Some motorway issues. The northbound M6 between the M5 interchange at junction 8 up to Wednesbury at 9. Still slow going. Stop-start for the earlier broken down car. All the lanes are back open, but queuing back to Great Barrett at junction 7. Northbound M42 as well, just after 4 Shirley and Dorridge queuing. An earlier broken down van again. That's been sorted out. All lanes open, queuing back towards the M40 interchange northbound at 3A. Northbound M1 Hemel Hempstead junction 8. Outside lane of 4's combed off. There's been a collision causing queues. And very slow clockwise for the M25 from 16 to Maple Cross 17. There was a collision. All the lanes back open, but we're still seeing a fair amount of congestion on the approaches. And that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Do you mind if I ask you a little bit about Sebastian? It really amazes me how a mother who can lose a child in such a shocking and unexpected way, so little, so precious, can then turn that grief into something so positive. How did you find the strength to get up, get a camera crew, as you say, travel to the other side of the world and investigate all of this?
I was angry at Sebastian for dying. You feel like saying, God, 32 years later, and I can still get very, very upset about it. I was angry that something that while he was born and lived with me and slept and then died, they were actively campaigning in New Zealand to try and stop this happening because they had a very high cot death rate there. They had the lady, the Anne Diamond, if you like, of New Zealand, a television presenter called Judy Bailey, went on telly every night and said, if you're just about to put your baby down to sleep, put him on his or her back, not the tummy, and this will help. And there, cot death rate plummeted. And I went out to New Zealand and met her, and it was anger that drove me to come back and demand that we have the same advert here, the same campaign. And of course, I got all this complete nonsense from the Department of Health saying, oh, young mothers do not watch television, I was told. In other words, while New Zealand mums were being told how to save their babies' lives, we actively denied British mums that advice during the time that Sebastian and others were dying.
And the other point, I suppose, to make is it's helpful to educate all generations, because when I had my babies, my mum would say, he's not settling, just stick him on his tummy, he'll be much happier, that's what we did with you. And we had to say, well, things have changed, and, but it's about educating everybody, because it's not just the mums that get their hands on the babies.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:37. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, later in the show, I'll discuss claims that the King Charles is hoping to play peacemaker between his two estranged sons. Are William and Harry ready to kiss and make up? But before that, the European Union is facing a major revolt from a number of member states, and surprise, surprise, it's about migration. Yesterday, the EU voted in favour of a new pact that means all 27 countries in the bloc must take their fair share of asylum seekers or face €20,000 fines for each migrant. But straight away, Poland and Hungary said they will not accept migrants from EU states they dug in, and now they're on collision course with Brussels. And let's cross straight now to Brussels and speak with journalist and expert on the ground, Jack Parrott. Jack, we watched the votes here live on the show yesterday with huge fascination. It scrambled through, but within moments, Donald Tusk, of course, a former European Commission president himself, said no, they would not accept it, quickly followed by Hungary. The EU is at a huge impasse. Will other nation states follow?
So he was a former European Council president, Donald Tusk, and he indeed, what's interesting about him is that he's super pro-EU as having taken that job. But even him as a Polish prime minister now, he's not really in the same political line with the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. But this issue is so contentious in countries like Poland and Hungary that you're right, they immediately came out and said that they wouldn't accept migrants under this system. Having said that, they have agreed to it within the sort of negotiations that got it all the way up until this point in the European Parliament. As you said, it was a knife-edge vote. It was so close, and they needed to approve all 10 pieces of legislation, a piece of legislation related to detention, for instance, another one related to the transfer of migrants, another one to set up a database. They were all interlinked, and they all needed to pass if the pact was going to be approved. Now, many of the MEPs that voted in favour of some parts voted against other parts, depending on their political leaning. It was extremely close. It was a good bit of political theatre, Martin, but most people, I think, that I spoke to that walked away from that vote, while they feel they got it over the line, many of them still aren't completely content with what this pact is going to mean. And as you say, a number of governments already saying they won't be involved and they won't approve certain aspects of it.
And Jack, many member states saying, why should we take allocations of asylum seekers to our country if the EU simply cannot control its seafaring borders? While, of course, Greece and Italy, who have been inundated with numbers, would like to see the numbers dissipated across the member state. The big question now, though, Jack, looking forward, of course, we're looking down the barrels of hugely significant European elections, EU elections coming up in June. We've already seen parties in France across the bloc saying they're going to make hay out of this issue. The Eurosceptic vote could surge as a consequence.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this, Martin, is that people that are sort of anti-immigration and want to prevent immigration into the European Union aren't really happy with the deal because it doesn't have too much in it about returns to country of origin. It does have quite stringent measures about detention on the EU's external borders. And so parties on the left that consider themselves more pro-human rights and want to take a slightly softer line, they're not very happy about that. Like I said, a lot of people that voted in favour of certain aspects of this deal aren't happy with it overall. The hard right and the hard left abstained on or voted against many of the aspects of the deal. There was quite an interesting moment during the votes, Martin, where a group of protesters stood up and said, vote no against this deal, kill the pact. This pact kills, I think, was their chant. And the far left MEPs got up and congratulated them. It was a big sort of scene that happened, and they tried to charge through these votes to make sure they got before the vote, Martin, just as a bit of context to this, it was a number cruncher. It was like watching House of Cards or something. All of the different political factions were trying to find out whether each of the different angles would be able to get enough votes to get it over the line. It was exciting. The deal, is now approved. Important to say that when it relates to the June elections, Martin, this pact won't actually come into enforcement until 2026. So while the people that have tried to push it over the line want it to be a vote swinger, nothing really changes before the elections.
But it will matter to those political parties who are saying, we didn't vote for this as a nation. A few MEPs voted for it. They don't represent millions and millions of voters. Why should people in France accept the consequences of MEPs from all over the shop? And I think they will make hay over this. Marine Le Pen has already said that she will. And President Macron, we heard yesterday, was frantically ringing around to try and get Donald Tusk's MEPs to abstain to get this over the line. So clearly, this is a matter of huge significance within the political bloc.
It is exactly that, but it's politics, not the practical implementation of the changes of this deal. So all of the different political factions will try and sell it that they either won or they're fighting against this when it comes to June's elections. But voters aren't going to see changes in how the asylum process works yet, not until 2026.
But political parties will be able to say, unless you vote against the European Union, unless you vote Eurosceptics in like us, we won't be able to stop this, and it will come.
But the pact is already voted on now as far as the EU goes. So to have to try and overhaul it in the next elections would be really difficult. It's politics. This is it. You're right in some sense that they will try to say that if they're elected in, they'll be able to stop it. But the overwhelming numbers ahead of the EU elections is that the centrist bloc that got this over the line is likely to retain most of the majority in the elections. It's all to play for in June. We'll have to wait and see how that falls out.
Are you hearing, as we did, that Slovakia are eyeing what Poland and Hungary did? And you're right, it is politics, but posturing and playing tough against the EU lands well domestically, particularly when it's about political survival. Who would have thought that the rebel in the midst would be Donald Tusk?
Yeah, that's kind of the big surprise, and the other leaders have tried to get him on board. Like you say, there's grumblings in different countries. For instance, Czechia, for instance, Slovakia. The reason being with Poland as well is because this deal doesn't really, according to them, take into account the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, in fact, millions of Ukrainians who've entered the European Union. But that's done on a different system. It's not international protection like someone from Afghanistan or Syria might look for. It's, as you know, Martin, extremely complex, and the politics gets played around it. The institutions of the European Union are saying, listen, this deal, though, does actually prevent us and give us much, much more ability to prevent people entering the European Union.
OK, superb stuff. Jack Parrock, as I've got to say yesterday, I actually missed being in Brussels for the first time because I love it when there's bedlam over there. Jack Parrock, thank you for joining us, giving that excellent, comprehensive update on the situation in Brussels. Now, the controversy over fake Royal Mail stamps just won't go away, and now a senior Tory MP says China is behind the chaos. Well, I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Staying mild for the UK through the rest of the day and into Friday too, but we will see some rain moving into the northwest. This weather front that's been affecting southern areas has created a few wiggles and waves on it, and this wave will push up into northwestern areas through this evening. So Northern Ireland are likely to see some heavy bursts of rain through the next few hours before that moves away into western areas of Scotland, northwestern England, Cumbria in particular, like to see some heavier rain this evening. Further south, though, it should remain dry away from the coast and over the hills, but it will be a particularly cloudy night. However, it will be another mild start on Friday, temperatures not much below double digits wherever you are. The best of the sunshine first thing will be restricted to the far northeast of Scotland. Further south across Scotland, it will be quite cloudy and wet through much of the day, also across parts of Northern Ireland, this area of northwest England as well. Further south, though, for much of central southern England and Wales, the cloud will break up and there'll be some sunshine by the end of the afternoon. It will be a little hazy, but it's strong enough to pick temperatures up, put into the high teens, possibly the low 20s by Friday afternoon. Now that area of rain sinks further south into parts of North Wales, more widely across northern England through Saturday, and behind it we see some unsettled weather with showery outbreaks of rain. That's also going to introduce cooler air to more northern areas for Sunday, so more unsettled and cooler end to the weekend, but across the south it should remain dry.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, and we have some breaking news for you now, and it's that O.J. Simpson has died at the age of 76. His family has put the following statement on X, formerly known as Twitter, and it says this: on April the 10th, our father, Oriental James Simpson, succumbed to his battle with cancer. He was surrounded by his children and grandchildren, and during this time of transition, his family asks that you please respect their wishes for privacy and grace. Of course, Simpson was a hugely popular and high-profile American football player who later fell from grace, was, of course, tried for murder. And that infamous car chase scene, which captivated the world's media prior to his arrest, would have much more reaction to this breaking news story throughout the show. O.J. Simpson has died at the age of 76. It says here he succumbed to his battle with cancer, and in a family statement it says he was surrounded by his children and his grandchildren. During this time of transition, his family asks that you please respect their wishes for privacy and grace. Of course, he was tried for murder in October 1995. It was dubbed the trial of the century. He was found not guilty of murdering 2 people. That's a breaking news story, and we'll have a full update throughout the show and full reaction. Now to the latest development in a story that GB News broke in January. And now former Conservative Party leader Ian Duncan-Smith claims China is behind the huge number of postage stamps that are circulating in the UK that are fake. Now, as I said, this was all kicked off by a GB News investigation, and that was by Jessica Heldon. And we found that people are being fined £5 to receive their post because the Royal Mail says that stamps that have been bought at post offices are actually fake. Well, I'm joined in the studio by that woman, Jessica Sheldon, our digital finance editor, who broke that story. Well done. This story just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling. And now former Prime Minister has got involved. He blames China. Do you think that's true, or is that a red herring?
Well, I think it's very interesting because I think there's 2 elements to this story. We have seen stamps which you wouldn't realise are fake, but when you compare them to genuine stamps, they do look counterfeit. I'll hold them up to the screen now. And you wouldn't know necessarily until you look at them. The barcode is flat, the colour is slightly different.
Which ones are the fake and which ones are real here?
We have some counterfeit ones here, the larger ones, and then these are some genuine stamps.
They just look the same.
It's really hard to spot, yeah,
I couldn't tell the difference between them.
Now, Royal Mail say, you know, buy your stamps from a reputable place. Now, these were bought on an online marketplace. But we've also heard of problems with people buying stamps from post office and post office stores and well-known supermarkets as well, and they're being told that their stamps are counterfeit. So we are hoping for some answers on that front as well.
Why on earth would the Chinese, if they're going to try and disrupt, you know, the British society, why would they do dodgy stamps?
Well, certainly it's a puzzle. I mean, it's very expensive for people who are getting just a card or a Christmas card, perhaps, and they are having to pay £5 for it. But we need some more answers, I suppose.
Yeah, and Ian Duncan-Smith is calling this an act of economic warfare and akin to printing counterfeit money. Of course, it is causing chaos. You've been contacted by quite a few GB News viewers who've had problems with these dodgy stamps.
Yeah, absolutely. Last week we interviewed a lady who had actually found that the stamp that her son was charged £5 for, because it was supposedly counterfeit, was in fact genuine, and Royal Mail apologised. In a letter to her, they said that the stamp had been rechecked by their team and confirmed to be genuine, and they said that they were therefore wrong to apply the surcharge and very sorry that their actions had failed her on this occasion.
OK, super. That's great stuff. Jessica Heldon, thank you very much on a story that just keeps rolling and rolling. We have a comment here. A spokesman for the Royal Mail said this: "We are working hard to remove counterfeit stamps from circulation, and we regularly monitor online marketplaces to detect suspicious activity such as sales of heavily discounted stamps, and work closely with retailers and law enforcement agencies to identify those who produce counterfeit stamps. We work closely with a number of police forces across the country, and in recent cases, we have recovered stamps with a retail value of over £250,000. Now, a reminder of the story that broke a few minutes ago. O.J. Simpson has died at the age of 76. We'll have full reaction after this. I'm Martin Daubney on Britain's News Channel. Now's your weather, Annie Shuttleworth.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Staying mild for the UK through the rest of the day and into Friday too, but we will see some rain moving into the northwest. This weather front that's been affecting southern areas has created a few wiggles and waves on it, and this wave will push up into northwestern areas through this evening. So Northern Ireland are likely to see some heavy bursts of rain through the next few hours before that moves away into western areas of Scotland, northwestern England, Cumbria in particular, like to see some heavier rain this evening. Further south, though, it should remain dry away from the coast and over the hills, but it will be a particularly cloudy night. However, it will be another mild start on Friday. Temperatures not much below double digits wherever you are. The best of the sunshine first thing will be restricted to the far north-east of Scotland. Further south across Scotland, it will be quite cloudy and wet through much of the day, also across parts of Northern Ireland, this area of northwest England as well. Further south, though, for much of central southern England and Wales, the cloud will break up and there'll be some sunshine by the end of the afternoon. It will be a little hazy, but it's strong enough to pick temperatures up into the high teens, possibly the low 20s by Friday afternoon. Now that area of rain sinks further south into parts of North Wales, more widely across northern England through Saturday, and behind it we see some unsettled weather with showery outbreaks of rain. That's also going to introduce cooler air to more northern areas for Sunday, so more unsettled and cooler end to the weekend, but across the south it should remain dry.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to Blantyre in South Lanarkshire firstly, and the East Kilbride Expressway, eastbound A725, blocked from Main Street to Glasgow Road and queuing. There's a bus fire there. At Gloucestershire, the A48 in Minsterworth is shut by the lower Lee turning. There's been a serious collision. Still queuing north up the M1 towards Hemel Hempstead at 8. All lanes are back open following an earlier collision. A breakdown clockwise M25. There's one lane, one shut just after junction 5. That breakdown's causing delays. And the A35 between the Esso roundabout in Bridport and the Monkeys Jump roundabout in Dorchester closed both ways for resurfacing repairs. On the ferries, an hour's worth of delays between Dover and Dunkirk on the FDS. That is due to a technical problem this afternoon. And for now, that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Variety Cruises have been sailing since 1942, and thanks to them, you could set sail in 2025. You have the chance to win a 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With your flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, you can choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. You'll also win an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash that you can use to make this summer spectacular. We'll also treat you to these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. O.J. Simpson has died at the age of 76 following a battle with cancer. His family say he was surrounded by his children and grandchildren and will be getting all the latest reaction to that death throughout the show. Next, the Prime Minister is facing a massive cabinet revolt. He decides to leave the European Convention of Human Rights. Both the Chancellor and the Home Secretary are set against it. And there's more problems for Rishi Sunak as Boris Johnson puts the boot in, this time on defence, smoking and the spirit of Winston Churchill.
When I look at some of the things that we're doing now, I think that are being done in the name of conservatism, I think they're absolutely absolutely nuts.
And the court has heard that a Moroccan asylum seeker told police he knifed a pensioner to death as revenge for Gaza. We'll bring you all the latest on that story, and that's all coming in your next hour. Welcome to the show. I want to hear from you. Get in touch. There's a new way of doing so. You can send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/you're safe. You go there now, you see that I'm logged in. Keep it clean, be nice, and I'll read out some comments. What do you make of the passing of O.J. Simpson? You remember the trial of the century. Of course, he was up for a double murder rap, and that was in October 1995. He was acquitted of those murders. Before that, he was part of a dream team of NFL American footballers, a huge celebrity. That case, the most publicised murder trial in human history. What do you make of his passing? Drop me your comments. And also, we're covering homelessness. An extra £600 million being spent on housing homeless asylum seekers. Now that bill is £4.3 billion per annum, housing asylum seekers. Is it time to cry? Enough is enough. But before all of that, it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's Polly Middlehurst.
You're with GB News. Let's just confirm that breaking news coming to us in the last few minutes. The former American footballer O.J. Simpson has died of cancer at the age of 76. His family issued a statement saying he died surrounded by his children and grandchildren, and they asked for privacy at this time of transition. O.J. Simpson was acquitted of killing his ex-wife Nicole Brown and her friend in 1994 in a trial that captivated the American public. An estimated 95 million people watched live TV coverage of the police pursuit of O.J. Simpson in his white Ford Bronco across Los Angeles. O.J. Simpson, who has died at the age of 76. Well, in other news today, the Prime Minister says the plan is working. As new NHS figures show, hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for the 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's down from just over 320,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have both pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March next year. Rishi Sunak said there is more to be done.
Well, when I became Prime Minister, I said that cutting waiting lists was one of my 5 priorities. And whilst we haven't made as much progress as I would have liked, today's figures show that we are making headway towards that goal. Over the last 5 months, a reduction of around 200,000 in the overall waiting list, which is positive. And if it wasn't for industrial action, an extra 430,000 patients would have been treated. So whilst there's, of course, a lot more work to do, the plan is working.
Nearly half of health service workers have spent time looking at jobs outside the NHS. Researchers have found around 47% have looked at employment outside the service, with 14% applying for non-NHS jobs between March and June last year. It's understood job stress, workload, staff shortages and pay are the top reasons for staff wanting to leave. A man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was fatally stabbed in Yorkshire as she pushed her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habiba Masoom will appear in court again in Bradford tomorrow, speaking today only to confirm his name, date of birth and address during a short 6-minute hearing. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. Her baby was unharmed in the attack. And a Moroccan asylum seeker on trial for the murder of a pensioner in Hartlepool told police he was motivated by the conflict in Gaza. 45-year-old Ahmed Alid denies murdering 70-year-old Terence Carney, as well as the attempted murder of his housemate Javed Nouri last October. He says he carried out the attacks as an act of revenge for Israel's killing of children in the Palestinian conflict. He's also accused of assaulting 2 female police officers who had interviewed him after his arrest. Hundreds of Tata steel workers are set to go on strike over the proposed closure of Port Talbot's blast furnaces in Wales. Around 1,500 steel workers based at Port Talbot and Llanwern in South Wales have voted for industrial action over the company's plan to close its furnaces, resulting in the potential loss of 2,800 jobs. It's the first time in over 40 years that Port Talbot steel workers have gone on strike. Institutional bias prevented further investigation of complaints made by sub-postmasters about the faulty Post Office Horizon IT system. Former Post Office Managing Director David Smith has been giving evidence today to the inquiry into the Horizon IT scandal. Between 1999 and 2015, more than 900 sub-postmasters were prosecuted because of the flawed software. Mr. Smith apologised today for a 2010 email when he said about a pregnant sub-postmistress's prison sentence that it was brilliant news. Meanwhile, the Royal Mail is working to remove counterfeit stamps from circulation after an increase in reports of fakes being sold in shops and online. The Telegraph reports today China is flooding Britain with counterfeit Royal Mail stamps, with small retailers buying forgeries online. It's understood that the fakes were causing a rise in complaints when stamps bought from legitimate stores were being deemed fraudulent, resulting in a £5 fine. GB News asked shoppers in Horsham in West Sussex what they thought about the problem.
Awful, but this is what happens. There's a lot of counterfeit items right across the patch, really. So it doesn't surprise me, but I don't know whether there's anything that can be done at the borders.
Dreadful, really. Dreadful situation. Just an addition to everything else that's going wrong in the world.
Well, I don't use stamps very often, to be perfectly honest. So it's but I did see the difference between the real and the counterfeit. And, you know, you'd be hard-pressed to see it, wouldn't you?
Now, a once-a-day migraine pill has been recommended for use on the NHS, with a charity claiming it could change the lives of thousands. The pill, sold under the brand name Equipta, has been given the green light for NHS use under new final draft guidance. Anyone who experiences at least 4 migraines a month and has tried at least 3 other methods of treatment but found no relief will be eligible. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. And we start with this afternoon's breaking news. And O.J. Simpson has died at the age of 76. His family has put the following statement on X, which, of course, was formerly known as Twitter. They said, on April the 10th, our father, our uncle James Simpson, succumbed to his battle with cancer. He was surrounded by his children and grandchildren. And during this time of transition, his family asks that you please respect their wishes for privacy and grace. Now, O.J. Simpson, of course, was one of the most famous people in all of America, a hugely respected American football NFL player who then went through an astonishing fall from grace when he was charged with a double murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ronald Goldman. And he set off in that infamous car chase you can see on your screens now across Los Angeles. That's him and his Ford Bronco, a 93 Bronco. Helicopter went above that. This was broadcast across the world, and the ensuing murder trial, which took place in October 1995. By the way, Simpson was found not guilty on both of those charges, became what was called the trial of the century. It was, for many, the first time in history we'd seen the inner workings of a murder trial live on television. For those who remember, it was a huge global event. The forensic evidence was there, the entire trial on display. Central evidence was, of course, a blood-stained glove that was found on O.J. Simpson's property. That was the primary piece of evidence used against him, but he was acquitted on both counts, and then his life began to spiral out of control. Never publicly really recovered from the reputational damage of that trial. A spectacular rise and fall, the American dream going to tatters, and all publicised on TV, making it the perfect, in many senses, Hollywood story. It had everything. It had opulence, it had wealth, it had money, it had the downfall. Now, O.J. Simpson passed away, died of cancer, aged 76, and we'll have full reaction to that story throughout the show. Now, moving on to the latest on whether the UK will pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights over the government's Rwanda plan. And it's claimed that 12 cabinet ministers, including the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Home Secretary, are against leaving the ECHR. But should we listen to them or listen to the electorate? Well, I'm joined in our studio by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, how many times now have we heard that we're going to leave the ECHR? Oh, no, you shouldn't. Oh, yes, we should. In, out, shake it all about. Is there any gravitas in this latest round?
Well, as you say, I mean, this debate has been going on for years and years. The question now is whether Rishi Sunak is beginning to think at least about shifting government policy to leaving the ECHR. It couldn't be done in this parliament, but it could be something that Conservatives would put into their manifesto for the next election. Now, is he really thinking about it? Well, the evidence that we've got is Claire Coutinho, who's a very close ally of Rishi Sunak's and a close friend, the Energy Secretary. She came out yesterday and said that that Swiss European Court ruling was concerning for Britain. Now, lots of people in Westminster read that as essentially Coutinho sort of putting out some feelers to see how the Conservative Party and the country at large would react to the government making those kind of noises about the ECHR. Lots of Conservative backbenchers and 50% of 2019 Conservative voters are for leaving the ECHR. But the cabinet ministers, by 2 to 1, would like to stay inside. Yeah. So essentially, whichever route Rishi Sunak goes down, he's going to come up against a lot of opposition. And it's interesting, when you look at the metrics, there was a poll this week on should we leave the ECHR. You never guess what? 52% want to remain. It is like a new Brexit. Only 27% of the population, the electorate in total, actually want to leave. The rest are undecided. It seems like a bit of a non-starter, and I keep saying we've had so many immigration lawyers on the show, Olivia, who say the ECHR isn't the problem. Italy goes around the ECHR, France goes around the ECHR routinely on asylum, on border control. The problem isn't the ECHR, the problem is having politicians with the guts to stand up to them. Well, that is an argument, and there is also the argument that actually quite a lot of the legislation in the ECHR is pretty much replicated in our own domestic Human Rights Act. So it could be that even if we left the ECHR, Britain would still find itself in exactly the same position. The difference, of course, is that if a party pushed on its manifesto that it wanted to, say, repeal the Human Rights Act or completely reform the Human Rights Act, then the country here, people in Britain, would get to vote on whether or not they wanted to do that. Of course, Britain doesn't really get a say in ECHR law. So, you know, Brexit supporters would say even if those laws were essentially just transposed onto the British statute book, at least we would get the decision one way or another about whether to keep those laws in place. Well, should we stay or should we go? Well, of course, we're the People's Channel, and we were out and about in Birmingham earlier on, and we asked people there, should we leave the ECHR?
Yes, I do.
Why is that?
Because of all their rules and regulations. Yeah, I mean, and we're a good country, and we do all things good anyway.
No, I don't think he should. I think the reasons for that is that in terms of protecting human rights, so in terms of the government's responsibility to making sure that all individuals are protected and groups. So, yeah, just making sure that everyone has a basic human right.
We won't do it. We should have done it 5 years ago when we came out of Brexit. Nigel Farage was absolutely right. Why should a foreign government tell us what to do?
We should leave there.
Absolutely not. I think everybody should be given the opportunity to have a life, or live the life better than what if they're stuck here. It's a better life, isn't it? So yeah, I'm all for it.
Well, there we go, with echoes of Brexit. The public totally divided on the issue of leaving the ECHR. Olivia Utley, thank you very much for joining me in the studio. Now we'll have lots more on whether we should leave the ECHR at 5 o'clock, and there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much. Now, Boris Johnson has reignited his feud with Rishi Sunak by calling one of his flagship policies absolutely nuts. The Prime Minister wants to increase the minimum age, of course, for buying tobacco every year in an effort to phase out smoking. But it's fair to say Boris isn't impressed.
Look at some of the things that we're doing now. I think that are being done in the name of conservatism. I think they're absolutely nuts. And banning cigars. And what is? I mean, maybe you all think that's a great idea. I just can't see what is the point of banning? Well, the party of Winston Churchill wants to ban. I mean, donnez-moi un break, as they say in Quebec. You know, it's just mad.
Well, it had everything. It had Winston Churchill, a little bit of franglais thrown in at the end there. And I'm joined now by the political commentator, Benedict Spence. Benedict, welcome to the show. Benedict, Boris on very, very good form as ever. But Chris Hope, our political editor, earlier on was saying there's no coincidence in this because there could be a revolt on this tobacco bill next week. And Boris Johnson is leading the charge on this from over the Atlantic.
Well, quite right, too. I mean, it is sort of slightly extraordinary that we exist in a very strange time where, on the one hand, we're sort of edging towards prohibition on tobacco, but many people are also sort of pushing forward the idea of legalizing narcotics like marijuana. And, you are sort of wondering, where are we going to end up in a situation where our society effectively outlaws the use of tobacco products, but things like marijuana are effectively decriminalized and are absolutely fine? Certainly, if you walk around many of our major cities, police don't respond to people using all manner of drugs. Do we really think that there's going to be sort of any massive benefit, therefore, to banning tobacco? I would have thought not, because eventually what will happen is that the trade will just be taken over by the same criminal gangs that have profited off drugs. But I think it's a really salient point, actually. We all have a bit of a laugh when Boris talks about, Churchill and cigars and all that sort of thing, and, ho, 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 isn't it amusing? But it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because actually, when we're talking about what are the dangers around tobacco products causing cancer, lung cancer, that sort of thing, cigars make up a fraction, a very tiny proportion of the amount of tobacco products that are smoked. And broadly speaking, actually, they're probably far less likely to cause you to have some sort of cancer than cigarettes are because of the nature of how it is that you ingest them. And as the United States has found out, if you can put limits on cigars from, say, Cuba, that doesn't mean that the sorts of people who are likely to smoke cigars are going to have problems getting around those rules. It's a nonsensical proposal, I think.
But Benedict, what about the main event here? And that is, irrespective of its cigars, Winston Churchill, smoking or defence, Boris Johnson is putting the boot into Rishi Sunak. How helpful or not is that?
At this moment in time, I mean, this is just entirely my perspective. I don't think that Rishi Sunak has a prayer of leading the Conservatives to a respectable general election result. That could, of course, change, but where we're currently sitting, I don't think that's very likely. I think, therefore, it is not unhealthy to have a sort of a different pole, if you like, within the Conservative Party to proffer other ideas, a different way of doing things, if anything, just to try to nudge Rishi Sunak in a slightly more favourable direction. And whatever you might think of Boris Johnson, there is certainly a cohort within the Tory party that does look back wistfully and think, well, wouldn't it have been wonderful if we still had him? Right now, none of the actual sitting Tory MPs, nobody is prepared to put their head above the parapet and say, yes, I'd make a good alternative leader. So if it therefore falls to former prime ministers, be it David Cameron on foreign policy or Boris Johnson from across the sea, to say, actually, look, this is nuts. The electorate don't necessarily want it. Why are you doing this? That seems to be the best we have right now.
Yeah, totally agree. Benedict Spence, always a pleasure. Boris Johnson acting like the leader over the water. Rishi Sunak, well, no doubt smoke is coming out of his ears. Benedict Spence, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us. Now it's time now for the Great British Giveaway and our biggest prize so far. 10 grand in cold, hard, tax-free cash, luxury travel items, and also a 10 grand all-inclusive 2025 Greek cruise. Do you fancy the chance of trousering all that? Well, here's how you could get on board.
This is your chance to win our biggest prize of the year so far. First, there's a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash for you to spend this summer. Then, we want to send you on a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. Thanks to Variety Cruises, you'll be able to choose from any of their 2025 Greek adventures and discover Greece like never before. And with flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, all you have to do is relax. We'll also give you these terrific travel trays treats. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Great stuff. Now, Remainers, look away now, because the UK has become the world's fourth biggest exporter of goods, overtaking France, Netherlands and Japan. That sounds like a big Brexit success to me. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Dubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
You think this country needs new gas power stations? Apparently, this will all be about trying to get some form of energy security. Rishi Sunak has upset people today with this suggestion, people saying that actually this would do more damage to climate change than it would do good. Where are you on it, Richard?
I'll tell you exactly where we need a lot more gas power stations and nuclear power stations, because quite often the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Last week, we imported 16% of all our electricity because we haven't got enough capacity in the UK, and we're now totally over-reliant on renewables.
The part of the problem is the lack of storage capacity, which the government has finally got round to addressing. I think this as backup is actually quite a sensible idea. But they are not doing anything, as far as I can tell. At the moment, it will be retrofitted to have storage capability, which seems to be utterly bonkers. I mean, anyone who's got solar panels, you know very well you're storing up energy. So it's about storage as much as production. They could have gone, 20 years ago, we could have had nuclear power. We could have done more. We haven't looked far enough ahead in the future, and we are in grave danger of making the same mistake. I mean, the other side of this is, what is the difference going to be? Blackouts are, they're irritating and... Irritating?
It'd be disastrous. It would destroy our economy.
Well, they would be now, but, some of us remember 3-day weeks and things like that. And in fact, I grew up thinking that everybody had, at least a couple of days a week when they had to eat off a primer stove and things.
This is, again, I don't want to harp on, but this is one of the problems in the politics in our country, isn't it? So many politicians, they just think in election cycles. Absolutely. They just think, what can I do and say to get my own backside re-elected at the next general election? They're not always looking ahead at, actually, politics aside, what is genuinely the best thing for this country.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Welcome back. It's 4:24. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, later in the show, I'll discuss claims that King Charles is hoping to play peacemaker between his 2 estranged sons. And could William and Harry finally bury the hatchet? And I don't mean between each other's shoulder blades. Now for some good news. Britain is now the world's 4th biggest exporter, overtaking France, Netherlands and Japan, which Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch says shows the UK punching above its weight on trade. And this comes despite concerns that Brexit would massively hinder international trade. Well, a fantastic good news story. And I'm joined now by GB News' economics and business editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. Liam, welcome to the show. Always an absolute joy. I know you love a good news story, and you know that I love a great story about post-Brexit Britain. This, Liam, is reason to be cheerful, isn't it?
I think it is, Martin. The UK has always been a very, very significant trading nation. And these latest figures from the United Nations, for various historic reasons, it's the UN which produces the most widely used global trade figures, demonstrate that Britain is, as the Trade Secretary says, Kemi Badenoch, continuing to punch above its weight when it comes to sending its goods and services around the world. Let's have a look at some of the details. So exporting Britain is now the 4th largest exporter in the world after China and the US, and indeed Germany. China and the US, of course, are massive economies compared to the UK. Germany's also a bigger economy than the UK, and yet we're 4th in our exporting after them. That's up from 7th in 2021, according to those UN numbers. I think it's fair to say that the recent growth in exports has been driven by professional services. That's what the official data shows. That's things like financial services, legal services, insurance, a lot of the specialised stuff that the UK excels at. Also exports of things like education, pharmaceuticals. So we are still a very significant exporter. We're still a big manufacturer as well, Martin. We're the 8th biggest manufacturer in the world. But the one blot on the landscape of these figures, if I may, is that total goods exports, as opposed to services, total goods exports actually fell by just over 4% over the last year. And that does include manufacturing exports, of course. Why is that? I think that's largely because UK producers of goods, UK manufacturers in particular, they are labouring under some pretty difficult circumstances. The level of corporation tax has gone up. They have to pay high business rates on the value of their premises. Also, British manufacturers, British businesses in general, and British households pay more for their electricity than in pretty much any other major Western economy. So these are the reasons why I think goods exports have suffered a little bit, but the overall picture is of a trading nation that is looking outward to the world. And also a sort of subplot of all this is that our exports, even to the European Union, have been particularly high over the last year or so. And that's been driven not just by professional services, it's also been driven by energy. It's slightly anomalous, because the US has been exporting a lot of LNG, liquefied natural gas, to Europe, and it's been using the UK as a dropping-off point. We then take in the LNG. We have advanced LNG docking facilities in the UK, not least in Kent and in Wales. We then reprocess the gas, gasify it, if you like, from liquid, and then send it to the continent. And those counts as British exports too. So it's a pretty healthy situation. You know, our economy is quite sluggish at the moment. The cost of living crisis isn't over yet, and for many of our viewers and listeners, it's far from over. But there are signs of growth, as you and I have discussed in recent weeks, Martin. We've got a GDP number coming out tomorrow, which I think will confirm that recession is over. And there are signs that the British trading system is starting to get back into gear. And you know, you've got to get your good news where you can find it.
Absolutely agree, Liam Halligan. Although I do think it is a moot point that we no longer make as much as we used to. But is there any wonder when we can't be as competitive on a global stage in terms of labour costs, electricity costs, net zero targets and all the rest of it? But Liam, if we're exporting services and intellectual stuff, that's a great thing too.
It is a great thing too. The thing I would say in defence of manufacturing, and I'm a huge defender of British manufacturing, is we are still a really important manufacturer. You know, we're not the workshop of the world. Here, the Industrial Revolution is over. You know, we learnt about it as school kids, didn't we? Like every school kid in this country, you learn that Britain was the first manufacturing nation for all kinds of reasons, and now we're not. You know, the Chinese are the world's biggest exporters. You know, they've got 1.5 billion people. We've got 60 or 70 million. It does make a difference. The American economy is, you know, 3 or 4 times the size of our economy. It's a huge place. And yet, despite the difficulties we've had, despite our skills shortages, despite those high energy costs that I talked about, despite high taxation in some parts of the economy, we are still the world's 8th biggest manufacturer. We are still, under most definitions, the world's 5th or 6th biggest economy. That is not too shabby. The danger is, I think, and again, this is something you and I have discussed, over recent years, we haven't grown nearly enough, and we haven't grown in particular when it comes not just to GDP, all goods and services in the economy in a year, but in terms of GDP per head, what nerdy economists like me call GDP per capita. It's clearly a much more important measure of living standards than just straight GDP when you've got a fast growing population as we have in the UK. So, look, we are nowhere near out of the economic woods yet, but I do think inflation's coming down. I do think we're going to have some interest rate cuts quite soon. I do think that the economy will improve over the months to come. And for my money, objectively, I think you'd have to be pretty churlish not to view these trade figures as pretty good news.
Superb stuff. Liam Halligan, as ever, a post-Brexit bounce. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Always a joy. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. I'll be joined by the man who set up a website just for clever people called Trevor. We'll have that clever Trevor on the show. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour. Former American footballer O.J. Simpson has died of cancer at the age of 76. His family has issued a statement saying he died surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Simpson was acquitted of killing his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman in 1994 at a trial that gripped America. Almost 100 million people watching live on television the coverage of the now famous car pursuit of O.J. Simpson driving a white Ford Bronco, followed by multiple police cars across Los Angeles. After his record-breaking career in the NFL, he became an actor and had roles in the Naked Gun films. In 2008, he was convicted for his role in a Las Vegas armed robbery and served almost 9 years in prison. The Prime Minister says the plan is working as new NHS figures show hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for the 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's down from just over 320,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have both pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March next year. And a man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was fatally stabbed in Yorkshire as she pushed her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habibur Massoum will appear in court once again tomorrow in Bradford, speaking today only to confirm his name, date of birth and address during his 6-minute hearing. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. Her baby was unharmed in that attack. And hundreds of Tata steel workers in South Wales are set to go on strike over the proposed closure of Port Albert's blast furnaces. Around 1,500 steel workers based at Port Albert and Llanwern in South Wales have voted for industrial action over the company's plan to close the furnaces, resulting in the potential loss of 2,800 jobs. It's the first time in over 40 years that Port Albert steel workers have gone on strike. Those are your latest news headlines. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, back to this afternoon's breaking news. And O.J. Simpson has died at the age of 76. Only just a few months ago, O.J. Simpson took to Twitter to reassure fans about his health. Let's take a listen. OK, well, we're going now to Los Angeles and speak to our showbiz reporter, Kinsey Schofield, who joins me on the line. Kinsey, welcome to the show. Sad news, O.J. died at the age of 76. But, of course, looking back over his life, he'll be remembered mostly for the controversy around that double murder.
You're absolutely right. I mean, he was Americans' golden boy, 11 seasons in the NFL, that's our church here in the United States. And then he was one of the first celebrities. I know everybody thinks of Michael Jordan, but he really was one of the first athletes to transition into pop culture. You saw him appearing in movies. You saw him in these Hertz commercials that were so quirky and had so much personality. And Americans really loved this man. They were shocked by the death of his ex, Nicole Brown Simpson, at the time. And immediately all signs pointed to O.J. Simpson as the suspect in this double murder of Nicole and her friend. As Polly had spoken about a few minutes earlier, the entire country gripped by this trial, around the clock streaming. We had never seen something like this before. People were calling out of work so that they could sit down and watch the O.J. Simpson trial at home on the comfort of their couch. And the LA car chase it still affects the city of Los Angeles today. Whenever I book local news, they say you're on at this time unless there's a car chase, because without any detail whatsoever, Los Angeles stops everything they're doing and they take that car chase. That is a priority to this day because of O.J. Simpson and because of the amount of attention that received. It changed the way that local news works here in Los Angeles. But like previously discussed, he was arrested again in 2007 for kidnapping and armed robbery. He was sentenced to 33 years in that scenario, only spent 9 years in jail for that. But people really felt like that judge threw the book at him because of the Nicole Brown Simpson case, because so many people felt like he was guilty, and he was ultimately acquitted by a jury of his peers in that case. So a pretty wild life this individual led, a roller coaster, certainly. Do you remember when he wrote the book, If I Did It, where he hypothetically went over the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson? I mean, he just was such a character.
And Kinsey, the trial itself was not only captivating because it was publicised so wildly, it was a global event. I mean, I remember here in the UK, it was just absolutely captivating on every news output, but also a case that exemplified the rise from nothing of O.J. Simpson to the very top of America. It became the American dream, the poster boy, a black man that was worshipped by all Americans. And then this plummet into chaos and into tragedy. It just had everything. It was the ultimate showcase trial.
Yeah, and I think it also was a reflection of the culture at the time. A lot of people look at that acquittal and say it was because of the beating of, I believe it was Rodney King. I apologize if I am getting the name wrong there, but we had just had a beating of an individual. So a lot of people felt like the acquittal of O.J. Simpson was a reflection of real anger and rage over police brutality at the time. And they wanted to use this as an example. So there was just so much hurt and anger after the O.J. Simpson trial. And it took a long time for the country to heal after that.
It did. Huge case. Thank you very much, Kinsey Schofield, for joining us there from Los Angeles on the death of O.J. Simpson, aged 76, from cancer. Now, later this hour, I'll talk about the huge security operation ahead of Saturday's Grand National. But first, there's a new way to get in touch with us. And here's Bev Turner with all the details.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to South Lanarkshire firstly in Blantyre. The East Kilbride Expressway, eastbound side of the A275, still blocked between Main Street and Glasgow Road. A bus fire there is causing delays. Westbound M56, just after the Kingsway turn-off for the A34 Junction 1, a lane shutting queues, an abandoned vehicle. To the west of Minsterworth in Gloucestershire, the A48 shut just by the Church Lane turn-off and queuing. There's been a serious collision edition. At Bridport, between the Esso roundabout and the Monkeys Jump roundabout in Dorchester, both sides of the A35 are closed off and queuing for emergency repairs. And on the ferries between Dover and Dunkirk, there's technical problems. The FDS reporting delays at the moment of up to 1 hour. And for now, that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
There is a kind of a Mediterranean side to that as well, because my mother came from that side, you know, a big family. And I think there is that sense of community where family is kind of key. And I think that's really kind of what we sort of try and continue, really. I mean, certainly with children and stuff like that, you know, Sunday lunches were always, you know, the big thing.
Yeah,
really.
But if you go down the Old Kent Road today...
Very different. Very different, yeah. And that was quite some time ago as well, because we were very close to where the Thomas à Becket was.
Yeah, I know. I know, the boxing upstairs and all the rest of it. Yep.
And I did go down there not so long ago, actually, and it really is very, very different. I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily bad. I think we have a different view of things.
Most people in London, Nicky, don't even know the names of the next-door neighbours.
No, true.
We've completely lost that sense of community that you grew up with, that you knew. I think it's a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say sometimes I'm a bit guilty of it where I am now as well. You live in big houses, and I do see my neighbours, but, you know, it's not quite the same as it was back.
Now, I guess from that background, you're a teenager, you want to become a hairdresser.
Yeah,
that must have been quite a difficult call.
Yeah, that one was a really good call. My dad went, oh, God, what? I mean, it was just very funny. And certainly from the point of view of, you know, this was the early 70s. So it wasn't really the kind of the choice of most people would do.
No, but you did. Why?
I don't know, actually. I mean, I went to a grammar school and I didn't do as well in the final exams, and I was kind of forced into sort of leaving. And you suddenly go, ooh, no idea what to do here, really.
Yeah.
But the idea of doing something in fashion, and, you know, I really kind of... I know that I was given some really good advice, actually, by somebody that said, just start at the bottom. Don't necessarily go to, you know, college or whatever. Not, there may not be anything wrong with those, but just start at the bottom. Go to the best place you can and start sweeping the floor.
Welcome back. It's 4:42. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, later in the show, I'll talk about the extraordinary news that people no longer need to be able to swim to join the Royal Navy. No, it's not April Fool's Day. This is a true story. Before that, a court has heard that an asylum seeker shouted Allah Akbar, meaning God is great, as he stabbed a man in the chest before he went on to fatally stab a pensioner. Ahmed Ali denies murdering Terence Carney and the attempted murder of his housemate Javed Nouri. He also denies assaulting 2 female police officers who had interviewed him after his arrest. Well, our reporter Anna Riley is outside Teesside Crown Court now. Anna, what's the latest on the story?
Good afternoon, Martin. Yes, a jury heard today that Ali was motivated by the conflict in Gaza and to further his desire that Palestine would be free from the Zionists. This is something, the murder and the attempted murder is something that Ahmed Ali, 45-year-old man, denies. He is a Moroccan national, and the alleged offence took place on the 15th of October last year. Ali shared accommodation provided by the Home Office. He's an asylum seeker, and he shared the accommodation with 3 other asylum seekers. At first, the court heard that he got along with his housemate Javed Nouri. He believed that his housemate was a Muslim, and he complimented him on his cleaning. But the court heard that when Ali found out that Mr. Nouri had converted from the Islam faith to become a Christian and started attending the local church in Hartlepool, that things got bad between them, and that Mr. Nouri tried to report concerns to the police and was attacked several days later. The court heard that in the early hours of the morning on the 15th of October, that Ali entered Mr. Nouri's bedroom as he lay sleeping and stabbed him multiple times, shouting Allah Akbar, Allahu Akbar, meaning God is great, as he attacked him. Mr. Nouri managed to fight off Alid, the defendant. Housemates called police, and then that was when Alid fled the house and stabbed Terence Carney, a 70-year-old man who was out on a morning walk, approached him from behind and fatally stabbed him. Police arrested him. They disarmed him of a knife that he used in the attack, the prosecution say, and then he was brought to the police station. And it was when he was brought to the police station he started speaking in Arabic, and this was recorded on the body-worn camera of one of the police officers. He began saying, "For the people of Gaza and Allah willing, Gaza would return to be an Arab country." He went on to praise Allah and spoke of him being displeased with those who went astray. He said that his hands were injured, otherwise he would have continued to what he referred to as the raid. He was then interviewed by police officers the next day under caution, and he spoke of returning with the army of Muhammad, with the non-believers having to pay tax to the Muslims and be humbled. He said that he'd killed 2 adults because Israel had killed innocent children, and that he said, "They killed children and I killed an old man." He swore by Allah that if the colonisation, by which he meant Israel, did not leave, that Britain was on the verge of an explosion and there would be more victims. He said he swore by the greatness of Allah that Britain would be a wreck, and that losing 2 victims was better than the whole of Britain being lost, and saying again that these attacks were for the sake of Palestine. Prosecution said then that the defendant went on to attack 2 female police officers. This trial will be continuing for around a month, 4 weeks, and we will be keeping our viewers and listeners updated as the trial continues.
OK, thank you, Anna Roniff. That's update from outside Teesside Crown Court. Now, undercover police officers will be deployed at Saturday's Grand National after last year's race was disrupted by animal rights activists. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Staying mild for the UK through the rest of the day and into Friday too, but we will see some rain moving into the northwest. This weather front that's been affecting southern areas has created a few wiggles and waves on it, and this wave will push up into northwestern areas through this evening. So Northern Ireland are likely to see some heavy bursts of rain through the next few hours before that moves away into western areas of Scotland, northwestern England, Cumbria in particular, like to see some heavier rain this evening. Further south, though, it should remain dry away from the coast and over the hills, but it will be a particularly cloudy night. However, it will be another mild start on Friday, temperatures not much below double digits wherever you are. The best of the sunshine first thing will be restricted to the far northeast of Scotland. Further south across Scotland, it will be quite cloudy and wet through much of the day, also across parts of Northern Ireland, this area of northwest England as well. Further south, though, for much of central southern England and Wales, the cloud will break up and there'll be some sunshine by the end of the afternoon. It will be a little hazy, but it's strong enough to pick temperatures up, put into the high teens, possibly the low 20s by Friday afternoon. Now that area of rain sinks further south into parts of North Wales, more widely across northern England through Saturday, and behind it we see some unsettled weather with showery outbreaks of rain. That's also going to introduce cooler air to more northern areas for Sunday, so more unsettled and cooler end to the weekend, but across the south it should remain dry.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:50. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. Now, at 5 o'clock, I'll host a debate on whether we should leave the ECHR or not. But before that, police have begun one of the biggest ever grand national security operations after animal rights activists disrupted last year's race. 12 months ago, the world's most famous horse race started almost 15 minutes late after people from Animal Rising, that group, got onto the racetrack. Well, I can now speak with Chris Phillips, who's the former senior police commander at Sports Stadia. Welcome to the show, Chris. Always a pleasure. It seems an annual event now, not only the race itself, but the fact it's being targeted by those who wish to disrupt it. What can we expect this year, do you think? It's a huge operation underfoot.
Yeah, it is a huge operation, but of course, don't forget the police in Liverpool are used to dealing with this, and over the years the threats have changed, and each year something else pops his head up. I think it is getting a bit annoying, though, isn't it? All these single-issue groups who just suddenly decide to pop up for one thing or another, and the police have to deal with them. I believe this year the Animal Rising have said they're not going to do it, but that doesn't mean to say that other incidents can't take place, including, of course, let's not forget terrorism, because we are seeing a rise in ISIS again, and this will be a concern for the police. But generally, security is pretty good at Aintree. And last year in particular, I thought the police dealt with it very well once they were confronted with the people running on the grounds.
Yeah, you're right. To mention ISIS there, Chris, of course, the Champions League fixtures this week were hit with threats. Of course, there was no action there, and we saw a significant beefing up of police, both at the Emirates and also in Paris and Madrid. Do you expect to see a similar thing at the Grand National, the old bill, making sure they're in full mode?
Yeah, I think so, and not only at the stadium itself or the racecourse itself, but on the outsides and in the train stations and town centres and city centres nearby. I think the thing about this is that ISIS put that piece out last week really to encourage those supporters in Europe to rise up and do something. And of course, we don't know, the police don't know when that might happen or who might do it. So it is always a bit of a concern, particularly at these very large set-piece events that are live on television.
What's so difficult, of course, now, Chris, is that it's just a lone individual or a couple of individuals can just get in and charge onto the course and cause chaos. And at an event as big as the perimeter of this is so big, you can't stop everybody getting in somewhere, can you?
No, race courses, a bit like marathons and things like that, are very, very difficult to secure because there is so much to them and so many options for any would-be protester or even terrorist. So this is always a bit of a concern. But listen, the police in the UK and other countries deal with this on a day-to-day basis. And the marathons and the race courses are running. So I think we should put some faith in our police and security teams, and hopefully they'll make sure that anyone that is spotted will be dealt with very quickly.
And Chris, briefly if we could, as an individual who's used increasingly now to make sure sports events stay safe, what is the current risk?
Well, the terrorism risk is substantial, but that's not really the only risk. There are so many groups that want to disrupt and get themselves on the telly. And I think that's the key thing here, Martin.
Super. So, well, thanks for joining us on the show. Chris Phillips, who's the former senior police commander at Sports Stadia, so he knows what he's talking about. Now, a reminder of this afternoon's breaking news. O.J. Simpson has died at the age of 76. He succumbed to cancer. O.J., of course, was a hugely successful NFL player, a golden boy, a poster boy of America, worshipped by black and white people alike. Went on, of course, to become the star of the murder trial of the century, as it was called, his former wife, Nicole Simpson. A hugely spectacular fall from grace, and of course that car chase across LA. We'll have much more on that story throughout the rest of the show. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. But before all of that, it's time for your latest weather forecast, and here's Annie Shuttleworth.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Staying mild for the UK through the rest of the day and into Friday too, but we will see some rain moving into the northwest. This weather front that's been affecting southern areas has created a few wiggles and waves on it, and this wave will push up into northwestern areas through this evening. So Northern Ireland are likely to see some heavy bursts of rain through the next few hours before that moves away into western areas of Scotland, northwestern England, Cumbria in particular, like to see some heavier rain this evening. Further south, though, it should remain dry away from the coast and over the hills, but it will be a particularly cloudy night. However, it will be another mild start on Friday. Temperatures not much below double digits wherever you are. The best of the sunshine first thing will be restricted to the far northeast of Scotland. Further south across Scotland, it will be quite cloudy and wet through much of the day, also across parts of Northern Ireland, this area of northwest England as well. Further south, though, for much of central southern England and Wales, the cloud will break up and there'll be some sunshine by the end of the afternoon. It will be a little hazy, but it's strong enough to pick temperatures up, put into the high teens, possibly the low 20s by Friday afternoon. Now that area of rain sinks further south into parts of North Wales, more widely across northern England through Saturday, and behind it we see some unsettled weather with showery outbreaks of rain. That's also going to introduce cooler air to more northern areas for Sunday, so more unsettled and cooler end to the weekend, but across the south it should remain dry.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. The M1 near to Sheffield seeing some issues this afternoon. Firstly, on the southbound side of the carriageway, where two lanes are closed off Meadowhall Junction 34 down towards Junction 33. A collision is causing queues. On the northbound side, Junction 30 up to 31 on the M1, still looking slow following an earlier broken down vehicle. All the lanes are back open there, though. There's a broken down lorry, meaning the inside lane is coned off on the clockwise M25. It's before Enfield at Junction 25. There's queues back to 24 at Potter's Bar. Anti-clock at the Darenth interchange. Queues for the Dartford tunnels. The inside lane's combed off for a broken down van. And west of Gloucester, just west of Minsterworth, the A48 closed and queuing. That is at the scene of a serious collision there this afternoon. And for now, that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is your chance to win our biggest prize of the year so far. First, there's a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash for you to spend this summer. Then, we want to send you on a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. Thanks to Variety Cruises, you'll be able to choose from any of their 2025 Greek adventures and discover Greece like never before. And with flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, all you have to do is relax. We'll also give you these terrific travel treats. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel. A very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Coming up this hour, the Prime Minister is facing a massive cabinet revolt if he decides to leave the European Convention of Human Rights. Both the Chancellor and the Home Secretary are set against it. We'll be debating that hot topic shortly. Next up, Harry and William could finally bury the hatchet, and I don't mean between each other's shoulder blades, because it's rumoured that King Charles could be the peacemaker. And breaking news this afternoon, OJ Simpson has died following a battle with cancer, and we'll bring you all of the reaction to that story, and that's all coming in your next hour. Well, the show, always a joy to have you on board. Right, we're having a big old ding-dong in a minute. Should we leave the European Court of Human Rights? Is it still setting our laws? Is it still preventing us from getting flights off the ground to Rwanda? Is it still preventing us from turning around boats? Is it protecting the human rights of asylum seekers in the UK, even criminals, above the rights of British criminals or citizens, or is that just a huge red herring? Is actually the ECHR a bogeyman, something to blame when politicians don't actually get the job done? Or is it a great thing? Does it protect human rights and we should cherish it? That's the topic. Get your views in, and there's a new way you can do that. Send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/your say. I'm logged in. You'll see my mush there. Drop a comment. Keep it nice and clean, and I'll read out a bunch before the end of the show. But before that big ding-dong, don't go away. Now it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you. Good evening. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight. The former American footballer O.J. Simpson has died of cancer at the age of 76. His family issued a statement saying he died surrounded by his children and his grandchildren. O.J. Simpson was acquitted of killing his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman in 1994 in a trial that gripped America. Almost 100 million people watching live TV coverage of the now famous pursuit of O.J. Simpson, driving a white Ford Bronco, followed by multiple police cars across Los Angeles. After his record-breaking career in the NFL, he became an actor and had roles in the Naked Gun films. In 2008, though, he was convicted for his role in a Las Vegas armed robbery and served almost 9 years in prison. News here in the UK, and the plans is working, says the Prime Minister, as new NHS figures show. Hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for the 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February, and that's down from just over 320,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March next year. Rishi Sunak said there is, though, more to be done.
Well, when I became Prime Minister, I said that cutting waiting lists was one of my 5 priorities. And whilst we haven't made as much progress as I would have liked, today's figures show that we are making headway towards that goal. Over the last 5 months, a reduction of around 200,000 in the overall waiting lists, which is positive. And if it wasn't for industrial action, an extra 430,000 patients would have been treated. So whilst there's, of course, a lot more work to do, the plan is working.
Nearly half of health service workers, meanwhile, have spent time looking at jobs outside the NHS. Researchers have found around 47% have looked at employment outside the service, with 14% applying for non-NHS jobs between March and June last year. It's understood job stress, workload, staff shortages and pay are the top reasons for staff wanting to leave. A man's been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was fatally stabbed in Yorkshire as she pushed her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habibur Massoum will appear in court again at Bradford Crown Court tomorrow, speaking today only to confirm his name, date of birth and address during a brief 6-minute hearing. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. Her baby was unharmed in the attack. The Metropolitan Police has referred itself to the Independent Office for Police Conduct following the murder of a woman in London. 27-year-old Kanmaman Triumphit, known to her friends as Angela, was found inside her home address in a property on Bayswater in London on Monday morning. A post-mortem examination carried out yesterday found the cause of her death was sharp force trauma. There's been no arrest and inquiries continue. Hundreds of Tata steelworkers are set to go on strike over the proposed closure of Port Talbot's blast furnaces in Wales. Around 1,500 steelworkers based in Port Talbot and Llanwen in South Wales have voted for industrial action over the company's plan to close the furnaces, resulting in the potential loss of 2,800 jobs. It's the first time in over 40 years that Port Talbot steelworkers have gone on strike. Institutional bias prevented further investigation of complaints made by sub-postmasters about the faulty Post Office Horizon IT systems. Former Post Office Managing Director David Smith has been giving evidence today at the inquiry into the Horizon IT scandal. Between 1999 and 2015, more than 900 sub-postmasters were prosecuted due to flawed software. Mr Smith also apologised for a 2010 email saying a pregnant sub-postmistress prison sentence was brilliant news. The Royal Mail, meanwhile, says it's working to remove counterfeit stamps from circulation after an increase in imports of fake ones being sold online and in shops. The Telegraph reported today China is flooding Britain with counterfeit Royal Mail stamps, with small retailers buying forgeries online. It's understood the fakes were causing a rise in complaints when stamps bought from legitimate stores were being deemed fraudulent, resulting in a £5 fine. GB News asked shoppers in Horsham in West Sussex what they thought about the problem.
Awful, but this is what happens. There's a lot of counterfeit items right across the patch, really. So it doesn't surprise me, but I don't know whether there's anything that can be done at the borders.
Dreadful, really, dreadful situation. Just an addition to everything else that's going wrong in the world.
Well, I don't use stamps very often, to be perfectly honest. So it's, but I did see the difference between the real and the counterfeit, and you'd be hard pressed to see it, wouldn't you?
That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan that QR code on your screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now let's start with this afternoon's breaking news, and it's that O.J. Simpson has died at the age of 76. Only just a few months ago, O.J. Simpson took to Twitter to reassure fans about his health, and let's take a listen to that.
My health is good. I mean, obviously I'm dealing with some issues, but hey, I think I'm just about over it, and I'll be back on that golf course hopefully in a couple of weeks. But it was very nice hearing from you and hearing those good, positive words. Thank you.
Well, that was O.J. Simpson speaking a few months ago. Seeming in fine fettle, passed away, age 76, of cancer. And let's get joined now by showbiz reporter Stephanie Techi. Steph, welcome to the show. O.J. Simpson, of course, was the poster boy, the golden boy of an entire generation, worshipped by millions of Americans, and then a spectacular fall from grace, of course, because of that huge double murder trial in October 1995.
Yes, Martin, up until his death, O.J. Simpson did remain a very divisive character. And even if you can see the tributes from both the public and people who've known him, they're not going to paint him out as a saint due to those murders. And even when he was acquitted for that infamous trial which took place in 1994, he never did get his reputation back, and he never did get to that point of being America's golden boy. Instead, a life of crime did follow him. He was only released from prison in 2017 because he had been charged, he had been sentenced up to 33 years, Martin, for armed robbery and kidnap back in 2008. So, this is very much a controversial character. But the reason why O.J. Simpson's death is making the headlines, because it's bringing back then what was known the trial of the century. I think a lot of people remember that car chase between police and O.J. when he failed to hand himself in to that famous point in the court case before he was acquitted. And he was represented by Johnny Cochran. And he said that famous line, "If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit." And since he has been acquitted, that case has always followed him. But, they say don't talk ill of the dead, but still his past will come back to haunt him.
And what's interesting, Steph, is that his case represented the American dream, the rise from nothing to the very top, and then the plummet to nothing, the plummet back to the bottom. It had everything that captivated the celebrity world. That trial was a global sensation.
It was, and it was like a celebrity horror story, because you never expect to see one of the country's most famous sportsmen standing on trial for murder of his ex-wife and her friend. It just didn't make sense at all. And Martin, at the time when that case was going on, there was at the height of racial tensions in America following the Rodney King situation with police brutality. So it was a very tense time for America. And, a lot of people will continue to say that OJ did get away with murder, but at the same time, he was acquitted for that. But he did have to pay a few years later. He had to pay over £33 million to both the families of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, because he was found civilly guilty of the case.
Okay, thanks for joining us for that. Stephanie Tecci on the death of O.J. Simpson, died of cancer, aged 76. Now to the latest on whether the UK will pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights over the government's Rwanda plan, because today it's been claimed that 12 cabinet ministers, including the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Home Secretary, are dead against leaving the ECHR. Well, we went out and about in Birmingham earlier on today and asked the great British public, should we leave the ECHR? And here's what they had to say.
Yes, I do.
Why is that?
Because of all their rules and regulations. Yeah, and we're a good country and we do all things good anyway.
No, I don't think he should. I think the reasons for that is that in terms of protecting human rights, so in terms of the government's responsibility to making sure that all individuals are protected and groups. So, just making sure that everyone has a basic human right.
We won't do it. We should have done it 5 years ago when we came out of Brexit. Nigel Farage was absolutely right. Why should a foreign government tell us what to do?
We should leave there.
Absolutely not. I think everybody should be given the opportunity to have a life, or live the life better than what if they're stuck here. It's a better life, isn't it? So yeah, I'm all for it.
OK, it's time for a ding-dong, so let's debate this. And I'm joined now in the studio by the former Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane, and also by the political commentator, Suzanne Evans. Welcome to the show, the both of you. Dennis, let's kick off. Should we leave the ECHR, yes or no?
No.
And why not?
Very simply, Winston Churchill created it. It's not a foreign government. It is a court that obeys our values generally, British values shaped over 200 or 300 years, and applies them to a lot of other countries. I don't know why Rishi Sunak, why does he want to be like Vladimir Putin? There was a famous Russian called Rasputin. You've heard of him, I'm sure. Well, he's now called Rishi Putin in Russian circles because he's following Vladimir in pulling out of the European jurisdiction, which all sorts of governments could be annoyed with. The Swiss are annoyed with them at the moment because they ruled on climate change. Mrs. Thatcher was annoyed with them when they ruled on interrogation interrogation methods used in Ulster against the IRA that the court said were improper. But she didn't say, well, let's walk out of it. You know, she worked around and changed the rules so the army behaved in a slightly different way. So why on earth? And frankly, House of Lords time, House of Commons time, don't know what Rishi's playing at.
Well, Susan Evans, is it time to leave the ECHR?
Well, I think it is, yes, regrettably. And can I just say, I think the kind of comparison with Russia, if we leave, is the most ridiculous thing I've heard all day. Just because we leave the ECHR doesn't suddenly mean that we're going to become an anti-human rights cesspit. There are plenty of other countries around the world that aren't in the ECHR and have perfectly good and strong human rights records. I do think it's regrettable if we should leave, though, because, as Dennis said, Winston Churchill helped formulate it. Britain had a very clear role in getting it going. Let's not forget it was brought in the wake of 2 world wars in the 1950s, when human rights were at a very low ebb, and there was understandably a deep concern that the kind of horrors that we saw of Nazism, of Stalinism, shouldn't be repeated again. But the problem is we've got to a stage now, it's a bit like the European Union itself. Even though it's separate from the European Union, it's expansionist, it's anti-democratic, it's run by judges that have become highly politicised, and they're making highly political and anti-democratic decisions. So that's why I say, with regret, I think absolutely it's time to leave.
Dennis, you're shaking your head there, mate.
Only in a sense, I'm going to the Council of Europe, which oversees the ECHR, on Monday for 3 days. And there I will meet very right people who make Susan look like quite a liberal lefty, actually. Serious right-wingers from Italy, from France, from Spain, from Hungary. The idea to leave an international organisation in which they have a say, in which they have a vote, in which they can nominate a judge, seems to them to be absolutely bonkers. I mean, we really are an outlier now, and I think the problem is Rishi just doesn't understand international relations or diplomacy. He's worked most of his life making money in California. Good luck to him, good luck to his future. But the idea any serious British political person with some responsibility for the affairs of this country wants to, as I say, I'm sorry, Suzanne, you make a joke, of course we're not Russia, but it's Rishi Putin, that's his nickname now.
Suzanne?
Yeah, the thing is, you know, Rishi Sunak, I could make many criticisms of Rishi Sunak, but that he's not an international person on the global scale and a diplomat is certainly not one of them. Look at his background. You only have to see it's very, very internationalist indeed. I think the problem we have here is that we're not probably going to leave the European Convention, certainly not under this Conservative government, and I very much doubt under what's looking very strongly to be the next Labour government. But, you know, why has this suddenly being talked about again? It's because of this ruling from Switzerland that the democratic referenda on net zero has basically been overturned by the court. And this is an example of what I was saying about why it's becoming vehemently anti-democratic. It's basically made a decision that's nonsensical in a way. Net zero, you know, nobody voted for that. Nobody knows how much it's going to cost. Nobody knows what the impact's going to be on our lives. The European Convention certainly hasn't considered this, and yet it's made this ruling specifically about Switzerland, where people are living longer than ever, saying climate change isn't being taken seriously enough. People aren't going to live as long. I'm afraid the evidence is absolutely to the contrary. And this, again, highlights exactly what I was saying. Judges are making their decisions not based on law, not based on fact, but on political posturing. And that is not acceptable. And that's not an organisation we should belong to.
Dennis McShane, I can see you shaking your head. Very quickly, final word to you.
Very simply, I lived and worked for 15 years in Switzerland. I'm probably more Swiss than anybody's ever been in British politics. Talk to my Swiss friends. They welcome this. Swiss MPs welcome it. Switzerland's divided. It's a nudge in the right direction. It's not going to overturn anything. And we're all having to deal with this problem of climate change. Listen to the radio. No, I'm sorry. With respect, I do read Swiss papers in German and French, and there's no particular outrage. Even the Swiss People's Party, sort of your sister parties, I think you'd be in it if you're in Switzerland, Suzanne, they accept that we've got to try and get this right, and the European Court of Human Rights nudges us along in the right direction.
That's not true. Any country that signed up to it has to abide by its rulings. You know that, Dennis. This isn't a nudge. This is overriding national governments.
Okay, Dennis McShane and Suzanne Evans, we'll have to leave it there. And by the way, not everybody in Switzerland is happy about it. In fact, I'll be talking to a leader of a pro-Swiss movement tomorrow who's not at all happy about it. In fact, there might be some tasty action coming against the ECHR. Now, moving on. Harry and William could finally bury the hatchet, and it's rumoured King Charles could be the peacemaker when the Sussexes arriving in the UK next month. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The perception of a crime being committed is not based on whether that person intended to commit a crime or not, but whether the victim, in inverted commas, or anybody else for that matter who happened to hear whatever was said, determines that it was motivated by malice or ill will. Most of these things come out in heated exchanges or in, very casual exchanges. And then somebody says, oh, I'm offended, or I'm hurt, or I'm whatever, because this was clearly malicious and it's against me as a black person or a transgender or sexuality, whatever it might be. And somebody says, I perceive this to be motivated by hate. Now, at that point, what is the reasonable test that anybody could apply as to what was in somebody's mind at the time? You don't know what I'm thinking now. I don't know what you're thinking now. Why is it that a crime can be committed on the basis of what somebody is alleged to be thinking?
Well, that's also how discrimination often works, because people have worked out these days that saying something or sending an email like one I received some years ago that said, let's go round her place with pickaxe handles and balaclavas and see what we can do. Now, that's an email that was sent about me. People have worked out that you don't do that. But from the circumstance of what happens, if racial taunts were being shouted, if taunts about someone's protected characteristic were being shouted in the run-up to what then happened, it would be pretty obvious that that was a hate crime.
But we know, for example, that street preachers have been arrested merely for quoting the Bible and without actually intending, anything beyond that.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. 5:22. Always a pleasure to have your company. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, I'm going to speak to a broadcasting legend, and I can't wait to find out what she thinks about me, and more importantly, how I speak, because I'm as common as muck, and she's not. Now, could King Charles play the peacemaker between his warring sons? Well, according to reports, Charles is hoping to reconcile William and Harry next month when the Duke of Sussex returns to the UK for an Invictus Games anniversary service at St Paul's Cathedral. Well, I can now speak with royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. Could the two brothers finally bury the hatchet and not between each other's shoulder blades? And could King Charles be the peacemaker?
Well, this could happen. One of the problems is that we simply don't know what is going to happen. It's a very important anniversary, May the 8th, because a service of Thanksgiving is being held. Thanksgiving for, of course, 10 years of the Invictus Games. And this, of course, was an absolutely remarkable feat that Harry founded this to help injured and wounded servicemen and women. Now, there's no question about that. One of the problems, however, is that is going to be overshadowed, I suspect, or partly overshadowed by, firstly, the question, will Meghan be with him? And I suspect the answer is no, but I don't know. And then secondly, I think it's very likely that he will see his father. He might even come over before then. It's up to him, of course, and up to their security, of course, to be arranged. But will King Charles play a role in peacemaking? But the rift is very deep, as we all know, and the Sussexes for 4 years, they've attacked the royal family, and that is the reason for it. And William is naturally suspicious because he doesn't trust Harry, and he doesn't trust Harry with very good reason, because of the various attacks on the royal family. However, given the fact that King Charles is undergoing treatment for cancer, and given the fact that Catherine is seriously ill, preventative chemotherapy is, I should think, desperately stressful. She made that courageous video message to the nation. Will they get together? I suspect the answer to this will lie, or I hope it lies, in private links, talks privately that we don't know about. So we know that William was in touch with Harry after, of course, the video message. Apparently, the reports were the Sussexes didn't know of Catherine's condition before then. The facts are, however, that we simply don't know what's going to happen, but it is definitely possible that since King Charles has never closed the door, and since, after all, they're both his sons, and since two senior members of the royal family are seriously ill, this presents an entirely new scenario and possibly a new bridge. We will have to wait and see.
OK, that's one to watch. Superb stuff. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams, thank you for joining me on the show. Always a pleasure to have your company. Now, moving on, are the Royal Navy's standards sinking? Yes, because according to reports, potential recruits will no longer need to prove they are strong swimmers, with the Navy planning to scrap the 30-minute swim test prior to being recruited. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the former NATO commander, Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Welcome to the show, Chris. I have to confess, when I read this story earlier, I thought it was still April Fool's Day. On what planet is it a good idea to drop a swimming test for Royal Navy sailors?
Martin, I have to tell you, when I joined the Navy in the 1970s, it wasn't a requirement to be able to swim. So it's been going up and down for the last few decades, to tell you the truth. And if you go back to the 18th century in Nelson's Navy, 90% of sailors couldn't swim. So it's nothing unusual. I think there is a general desire to make recruiting more accessible to people, so not to exclude people. As you know, the recruiting targets are down across the board right now. But this is a temporary measure. When people get in the service, there's no question of them being allowed to go to sea before they can swim properly. So where there's going to be an additional burden is in training people to swim when they could be doing other more useful things like navigation and skills training.
Well, we've had a couple of emails here, Chris, I'd like to read out. Paul has said this: you have to do a swimming test to qualify as an air hostess. It's absolutely staggering. You don't have to do the same in the Navy. And Alan here says, when I joined the RAF, we had to be swimmers or have learned by the end of the course, or we got kicked off. So if the RAF and airline hostesses have to swim, it's astonishing, Chris, that sailors don't have to do the same. It's a bit like saying it's OK to be in the RAF if you've got vertigo.
Yeah, but I mean, it's almost like saying you can't be in the RAF unless you can fly. Well, you can't, can you? But the issue is, Martin, nobody's going to go near the sea or the front line until they can swim properly. My bleat with this is you really should transfer the responsibilities to people and say, look, if you want to join the Navy, swimming is part of that. Don't make that a training burden that we have to put on you. That would be my issue. But over the last 40 years, this policy has gone up and down all the time. It's just the latest manifestation. I think we need to look more broadly at the other issues that are lowering standards. It's not swimming that we need to be worried about. It's other physical and mental faculties that are being lowered to increase the numbers that worry me, to tell you the truth.
And I have to say, Chris, there's another email here, you'll say, beg your pardon, from Johnny, who says, this makes sense. The Royal Navy never seem to be at sea anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could counter that by saying, of course, you're never going to need to be in the sea, are you? Because our ships are so good and our people are so operational that it'll never happen. But having been in the Falklands, you know, and having rescued people from sinking ships there, you know, if you don't swim and you're in the Navy, you're asking for trouble, aren't you?
Well, you certainly think so. It certainly increase your chances of survival should anything go Pete Tong. Thanks for joining us on the show, Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Always a pleasure to have your company. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, Chris Parry just said this is nothing unusual. Most people couldn't swim in Nelson's time. When Chris qualified in the 1970s, you didn't have to swim. I just find it astonishing that you don't have to swim if you're in the Navy. And as Paul says here, airline hostesses have to be able to swim. You have to be able to swim if you're in the RAF. And Paul is saying here, what next? People in the Army who don't have to be able to walk. I mean, we're making a joke out of it, but I don't know. What do you think? Let me know. GBNews / you'll say is the way to get in touch with us. There's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, and in a few minutes I'll be joined by a Tory minister to discuss the state of the NHS. Waiting lists are slightly down. Is that a good thing, or are they still unacceptably large? I'll put that question right to her. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour. The former American footballer O.J. Simpson has died of cancer at the age of 76. His family issuing a statement in the last hour saying he died surrounded by his children and his grandchildren. O.J. Simpson was acquitted of killing his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman in 1994 in a trial that gripped America. Almost 100 million people watched live TV coverage of the now famous pursuit of O.J. Simpson, driving a white Ford Bronco followed by multiple police cars across Los Angeles. After his record-breaking career in the NFL, he became an actor and had roles in the Naked Gun films. In 2008, though, he was convicted for his role in a Las Vegas armed robbery and served almost 9 years in prison. The Prime Minister says the plan is working. As new NHS figures show, hospital waiting lists in England have fallen for the 5th month in a row. Over 305,000 people have been waiting more than a year to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's down from just over 320,000 at the end of January. The government and NHS England have both pledged to eliminate all waiting lists of more than a year by March next year. And a man has been remanded in custody after being charged with murdering a woman who was fatally stabbed in Yorkshire as she pushed her baby in a pram. 25-year-old Habiba Massoum will appear in court again in Bradford tomorrow, speaking today only to confirm his name, date of birth and address during a 6-minute court hearing. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar died after being stabbed in Bradford on Saturday afternoon. Her baby was unharmed in the attack. And hundreds of Tata steel workers are set to go on strike over the proposed closure of Port Talbot's blast furnaces. Around 1,500 steel workers based in Port Talbot and Llanwern in South Wales have voted for industrial action over the company's plan to close the furnaces, resulting in the potential job losses of 2,800. It's the first time in over 40 years that Port Talbot steel workers have gone on strike. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts, sign the QR code on your screen, or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Let's check on today's numbers for you, shall we? Well, the pound buying you $1.2532 and €1.1696. The price of gold is £1,870 and 34 pence an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed for the day today at 7,923 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Polly. Now, in a few minutes, I'll be joined by a Conservative minister to discuss NHS waiting list times. Apparently, they've gone down, but they're still massively high. We'll have a big debate about that after this. But first, there's a new way to get in touch with us here at GB News. And here's Bev Turner with all of the details.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/your say.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Very slow through South Yorkshire, heading south down the M1 this evening from junction 34 to 33 towards the Sheffield and Rotherham exit. The left lane I can see on camera is closed past the scene of a crash, taking about 20 minutes to get through. On the M5 in Worcestershire, and the outside lanes closed northbound just after Ford Bromsgrove turn-off where a van and a car have collided. And in Gloucestershire, southwest of Gloucester, the A48 is closed through Minsterworth following a serious two-vehicle collision. There are long queues heading west of Gloucester on the A40 towards Huntley as you divert. And the train situation for Greater Anglia is still bad, I'm afraid. Services suspended from Stratford to Tottenham Hale due to problems with the signals at Lee Bridge. And on London Underground, severe delays on the Piccadilly line, South Harrow to Uxbridge, due to earlier signalling problems at Harrow on the Hill. And for now, that's the very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Is the brand of toothpaste super important here, or is it more about the toothbrush? Because I was told a long time ago by my dentist, electric toothbrush, Pip, that is the way to go.
You're exactly right. I mean, the action of mechanically removing plaque, so using a brush, is much more effective than the brand of toothpaste itself. But in terms of the ingredient in toothpaste that we're looking for, it's something called fluoride. And fluoride is essential to help remineralize and strengthen our teeth. It's really important to use a toothpaste with fluoride. And in terms of brushing, using an electric toothbrush is just much easier. You know, you're brushing your teeth first thing in the morning, last thing at night. You're going to be a bit tired in those times. So using an electric toothbrush, you just hold it against your tooth and gum and it does all the work for you. So it's just much easier in my opinion.
But you have to use your electric toothbrush properly.
You're exactly right. Yeah, there is a technique of actually brushing your teeth, although it sounds really simple. With an electric toothbrush, you have to hold it against the tooth and the gum. Ideally, you want a pressure sensor in that toothbrush so you know exactly when you're pressing too hard. But if you're using a manual toothbrush, you need to move it around and small circular motions. But actually what I see is people who use manual toothbrushes, they tend to over scrub and over brush, which can actually lead to gum recession and your enamel thinning long term.
Sometimes I will get up in the morning and I will have breakfast and then I'll brush my teeth. Is that wrong?
Unfortunately, that's wrong. So the best time to brush your teeth is first thing in the morning, as soon as you wake up. If you're brushing after you eat and after breakfast, you're brushing your teeth in that weakened acidic state. So your teeth are actually under attack and they're much more vulnerable.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:38. We're on the final furlong. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, Rishi Sunak says the government's NHS plan is working. However, the waiting list for routine hospital treatment in England fell for the 5th month in a row. The figure has fallen by almost 200,000 in that period, but Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting has criticised the Prime Minister.
I don't know why Rishi Sunak's doing a victory lap. Waiting lists are higher than they were when he became Prime Minister. He's promised to cut NHS waiting lists. And you also look at the performance standards on things like A&E, ambulance response times. They are shockingly bad to the extent that people can no longer be certain that whether they dial 999 with suspected heart attack or stroke or walk into A&E, that they're going to be seen on time in the right way. So I think by now, hopefully, people have reached a conclusion that the longer the Conservatives are in power, the longer patients will wait.
Well, West Streeting wasn't having it, and I'm joined in the studio now by Health Minister for the Conservative Party, Maria Coalfield. Welcome to the show. So some good news for you. The numbers down for 5 months on the bounce, but Rishi Sunak had said earlier in the day he believed NHS waiting times were his biggest failure as Prime Minister. But this is good news today, is it?
It's really good news because it's not just the number of people on the waiting list are falling, but the length of time they're waiting for procedures. So compared to, I know you had the Labour Shadow Secretary on there, but in Wales, there's 40% longer waits for procedures in Wales where Labour run the health service there. But people are waiting just under a year now for many procedures, and we've opened up a number of avenues to get those waiting lists down from our community diagnostic centres. We've got over 160 sites now performing things like CTs, MRIs, endoscopies, which have helped get down those waiting lists. We've opened up over 100 surgical hubs across the country, which are, again, operating to get the back of that backlog down. We would be further ahead if we hadn't had the strikes. For example, I think in February there was 34,000 procedures that would have been done if it wasn't for the strikes, that would have brought those lists even lower. So considering we've just come through winter, considering the strikes that were ongoing, it is good news, and patients will be seeing the difference in terms of who else is on the waiting list and how long they have to wait.
And yet we have seen scenes yesterday in London, a South London GP, there were queues around the block, people queuing for hours, struggling to get an appointment. We saw similar scenes in Bristol, people queuing over 3 days to try and join a new GP there. People say to us all the time they struggle to get hold of a GP. They've gone missing in action, many people believe, and even getting a routine dental appointment. So there's still lots and lots of work to do.
There is. I mean, we did close down the kind of routine healthcare system for nearly 2 years under COVID, and of course that creates a natural backlog in itself. But if you look at dentistry, for example, since we put our new dental recovery plan in place in January, we've seen 500 new practices come and join NHS dentistry, and we'll create 2.5 million more dental appointments. We don't employ dentists direct, so we do need them to take up NHS contracts, and we're trying to make that more attractive for them. So there's good news all round, whether it's A&E waiting times, the 4-hour waits are improved, the 12-hour waits are improved, dentistry appointments are becoming more reliable, and the waiting lists are coming down too. So, you know, overall, it's positive news in terms of the direction of travel.
OK, talking about toothache, Boris Johnson has been having a bit of a pop at Rishi Sunak. He was in Canada having a go about smoking and the forthcoming expected vote. Is there any coincidence, do you believe, that Boris is saying this is a very unconservative thing to do? It's not what Winston Churchill would have done, of course, referring to him as the world's most famous cigar smoker. And a rebellion is expected next week. Is this Boris still leading as the leader from over the water, the king over the water? Is that helpful?
Well, I mean, it will be a free vote, and Rishi said that from the start when he announced it at a party conference last year. We're not stopping anyone from smoking. Obviously, we want people to stop smoking, but the legislation that's been brought in, anyone who smokes now will not be forced to stop. What we're doing is for children who are the next generation will not be able to legally buy cigarettes. So people who choose to smoke now, despite all the warnings, despite all the concerns, will not have that freedom taken away from them. And it is a free vote for a reason. You know, there's never been a whipped vote on smoking legislation, even under when Labour were in government. And so, you know, it's interesting to see how Boris would have voted if he was still in Westminster. But, you know, that is for each individual MP to make a decision on. The polling suggests it's very, very popular with the public because people know that the dangers and the harms that smoking can cause. You know, we know it's a leading risk factor in cancer, in heart disease, in stroke. Even from a dental point of view, it's a leading factor why people lose their teeth if they smoke because their gums recede. So smoking is, something that we need to eradicate, and the legislation will mean that the next generation will no longer be able to legally buy cigarettes.
Can I ask you, Wes Streeting has been very outspoken about how he says the NHS needs reform. It needs a mixture of private and public money to lessen the burden on the working classes. Nigel Farage has said a similar thing over the years. Have the Labour Party stolen a march on you here? Isn't that the sort of reform that the Conservative Party should have been cracking on with these past few years?
Well, we've absolutely been doing that. That's how part of the way we've got down our waiting list has been by using the independent sector. So each local area will be doing it through their NHS trust, but where the independent sector in their local area has capacity, they'll be using that as well. Some of our community diagnostic centres that we've opened up, doing the CTs, MRIs, X-ray scans, some of them are being done with independent providers providing those. Dentists are independent providers, as are GPs, and they take on NHS contracts. So the work between the NHS and the independent sector has been going on for decades, and actually that's a key reason why we've got many of our waiting lists down.
Do you think that the conversation around reform of the NHS is just long overdue? It's almost become like a church, something which just cannot be criticised, but despite the fact waiting times are slightly down, people still often are fearful of being critical of it because it is this ideology, but it is far from perfect, and is the solution to keep pouring endless billions into a bucket that seems to leak?
No, we've been very clear about that. It's not just about how much you spend, but it's what you spend it on. That's why our money, instead of when Labour are in government and they frittered away millions on an IT system that never saw the light of day, we're putting it into surgical hubs, we're putting it into dentists, we're putting it into community diagnostic centres, so that people actually see the difference this money is making. It's why I got into politics. I was a nurse, and I was fed up of working under the Labour government when they were in charge of the NHS, because by no means did they have any solutions then. And I'm not hearing much from ways that we're not doing already, to be honest.
OK, I want to quickly ask you again about Boris Johnson. A lot of people that watch GB News, they quite miss him. Do you think Rishi Sunak has got what it takes going into the next election? We keep hearing about growing numbers of letters going in, maybe a leadership challenge on the cards.
Well, when I'm door knocking, I'm knocking on a lot of doors at the moment. The one thing that people say to me is they're fed up with infighting within the Conservatives. They want us to get on and deal with things like the NHS and getting waiting lists down. They're not interested in personalities and who said what to who. Boris, I was a big supporter of Boris myself. He could have stood for leadership. Do you miss him? Of course. I think, Boris was a larger-than-life character. He could have stood in that leadership election the last time he withdrew. He could have fought the by-election when the recall was triggered. He chose not to. He chose to resign. So he made some of those decisions for himself. But absolutely, I think Boris has a huge amount to add, and people on the doorstep do miss him. But they want us to get on and start delivering for the country. And the figures out today prove that we're doing just that. Superb.
Thanks for joining me in the studio. Excellent stuff. That's Maria Caulfield, who's the Health Minister for the Conservative Party and doing the rounds today, but came to us first. Good work. Thank you very much. Now, it's time for our biggest giveaway of the year so far. Brace yourselves. It's your chance to win £10,000 in cash, luxury travel items and a 2025 Greek cruise worth £10,000. That's a prize package worth over 20 grand, and it could be yours, and here's how you could win it.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Staying mild for the UK through the rest of the day and into Friday too, but we will see some rain moving into the northwest. This weather front that's been affecting southern areas has created a few wiggles and waves on it, and this wave will push up into northwestern areas through this evening. So Northern Ireland are likely to see some heavy bursts of rain through the next few hours before that moves away into western areas of Scotland, northwestern England, Cumbria in particular, like to see some heavier rain this evening. Further south, though, it should remain dry away from the coast and over the hills, but it will be a particularly cloudy night. However, it will be another mild start on Friday, temperatures not much below double digits wherever you are. The best of the sunshine first thing will be restricted to the far north-east of Scotland. Further south across Scotland, it will be quite cloudy and wet through much of the day, also across parts of Northern Ireland, this area of northwest England as well. Further south, though, for much of central southern England and Wales, the cloud will break up and there'll be some sunshine by the end of the afternoon. It will be a little hazy, but it's strong enough to pick temperatures up put into the high teens, possibly the low 20s by Friday afternoon. Now, that area of rain sinks further south into parts of North Wales, more widely across northern England through Saturday, and behind it we see some unsettled weather with showery outbreaks of rain. That's also going to introduce cooler air to more northern areas for Sunday, so more unsettled and cooler end to the weekend, but across the south it should remain dry.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:50. We're on the final furlong. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, my next guest feels that she might be too posh to present on TV anymore. Well, the former BBC newsreader, of course, the legendary Jan Leeming, says that she no longer gets work because of her received pronunciation accent. Well, Jan joins me now. Jan, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. A wonderful face and a wonderful voice I grew up with as a nipper. And I actually agree with... I never thought people like me, commoners mug, would ever get on the TV. And now you're saying you're not getting any work because you're too posh. Tell me more.
Martin, can I put this in perspective? A Telegraph journalist contacted me yesterday about this H&H debate. I don't care. I had an Irish aunt who always said H. I don't mind, and both are equally correct. So I just said, thank you very much, no, thank you. So, of course, they made a story. Anyway, the story was that one of my Twitter followers, and I'm on Twitter mostly to present pieces on animals, rescues, etc., and I should stick to it. And this very nice person said, it was an absolute delight to listen to you doing the voiceover for Most Horrible Moments on Channel 5. You should have more work and you'd be lovely working with animals. So I responded, as I always do. And when I was a newsreader, I used to always respond to the public's letters. And I said, well, bless you. Thank you ever so much. I was surprised I got that job and delighted. But I said, actually, these days I'm too old and I speak RP. I'd do better if I had an accent. I'm not posh. Martin, I grew up in southeast London, Woolwich, right? My father had had a wonderful education in India. He spoke beautifully. He sounded a little bit like Richard Burton. And when I started sort of, talking like that, he sent me to speech and drama lessons. Thank you very much, Father, because I've earned my living. What this follower was saying was basically that he could understand me. I enunciate. I'm not against accents, not at all. In fact, some of them are very endearing. I mean, I love Eamon Holmes. And, Gloria Hunniford, when she started 40-odd years ago, had a very strong Northern Ireland accent, and she moderated it. If you listen to any of my news bulletins from 40 years ago, I was very, very precise. And even my son said, Mother, you sound totally different. I've got more relaxed. So the whole thing is what do they call in a nutshell? I didn't say that I was too posh. I just said I'm old, I speak received English, and I don't get work. I would have loved to have done For the Love of Dogs. That's really me. So that's it in a nutshell. I didn't say I was too posh. I'm not posh, for heaven's sake. You know, I mean, I can turn it on. My stepmother was Northern, so, you know, I had to be very careful. Bless her, she's dead now. But when I was with her, because I'm an actress and I mimic, I would find I started slightly speaking to her. I mean, if I were to go out for a drink with you, I would start to be a bit more Northern.
Yeah, I would love to go for a drink with you, and I would love to buy you a drink. And I think people watching this, Jan, will be delighted to see you back on the telly box. I think it's outrageous that this is happening. I hope people watching this in the TV business will get in touch and say, give Jan Lee. I'm not making out you're on your haunches, but I think it's great to have you back on the telly. It's great to speak to you. I grew up with you, and I love your voice.
Martin, it's very, very sweet, but you know, I am old. I'm 82, for heaven's sake. But, you know, it's still in me, a lifetime of interviewing people, and I can still hack it. But, you know, I'm old and I don't tick the PC boxes, and I don't move in. I live in deepest, darkest Kent. I don't move in shape right circles. So.
OK, well, it's been joyous to have you on the show, Jan Leeming. Thank you very much. I don't think you're too posh at all. I think you're excellent. Thanks for joining us, and that's all from me. And it's time for Jubes & Co. is up next. And don't forget to join us from tomorrow, 6 a.m. It's breakfast with Stephen and Anne, followed by Britain's Newsroom at 9:30. And then, of course, it's Tom and Emily with Good Afternoon Britain. I'll be back tomorrow at 3. I'm Martin Dorby, GB News. Now it's your weather, and it's Annie Shuttleworth.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Staying mild for the UK through the rest of the day and into Friday too, but we will see some rain moving into the northwest. This weather front that's been affecting southern areas has created a few wiggles and waves on it, and this wave will push up into northwestern areas through this evening. So Northern Ireland are likely to see some heavy bursts of rain through the next few hours before that moves away into western areas of Scotland, northwestern England, Cumbria in particular, like to see some heavier rain this evening. Further south, though, it should remain dry away from the coast and over the hills, but it will be a particularly cloudy night. However, it will be another mild start on Friday. Temperatures not much below double digits wherever you are. The best of the sunshine first thing will be restricted to the far northeast of Scotland. Further south across Scotland, it will be quite cloudy and wet through much of the day, also across parts of Northern Ireland, this area of northwest England as well. Further south, though, for much of central southern England and Wales, the cloud will break up and there'll be some sunshine by the end of the afternoon. It will be a little hazy, but it's strong enough to pick temperatures up, put into the high teens, possibly the low 20s by Friday afternoon. Now that area of rain sinks further south into parts of North Wales, more widely across northern England through Saturday, and behind it we see some unsettled weather with showery outbreaks of rain. That's also going to introduce cooler air to more northern areas for Sunday, so more unsettled and cooler end to the weekend, but across the south it should remain dry.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long delays continue heading out of Derbyshire into South Yorkshire up the M1. That was after a van broke down just south of the Sheffield South exit, junction 30. All lanes are back open, but it's still queuing back to the tip shelf services. And in Shropshire, the M54 remains closed westbound at junction 6, north of Telford at the scene of a serious accident. And the A40 remains closed heading out of London at Park Royal. Emergency services are dealing with an incident just after the Gypsy Corner junction. Long queues back the Westway roundabout at White City. In Essex, the A120 Braintree bypass stays shut eastbound from Galleys Corner up the Marks Farm roundabout following a serious accident, queuing back to Blake End. And Greater Anglia trains remain suspended in London from Stratford to Tottenham Hale due to problems with the signals at Lee Bridge. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Variety Cruises have been sailing since 1942, and thanks to them, you could set sail in 2025. You have the chance to win a 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With your flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, you can choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. You'll also win an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash that you can use to make this summer spectacular. We'll also treat you to these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather